This is where feminism got it wrong. Rosie the River was like, we can do it. We should have put a little asterisk. We can do it during this time of your cycle. If we understood the hormonal differences between men and women, we could strengthen our relationships.
Women are twice as likely to find sex more boring.
A woman's sexual drive is largely enhanced by...
I'm literally speechless.
Dr. Mindy here.
As a hormone expert,
best-selling author.
She has changed the lives of millions of women.
70% of divorces over the age of 40 are actually initiated by women.
After 40, a very specific estrogen is going down, and it's called estradiol. Sometimes we decide we need to leave our marriages, and sometimes we leave life. The most common time for a woman to commit suicide is from 45 to 55. Two major hormones are exiting. Your brain is operating differently. Conversations like this, to me, are life-saving. So here's how the cycle works. This is the one that upsets everybody.
I read a study from the New York Post that said that women are twice as more likely to find sex more boring than men.
Ooh.
And so what I want to know is, as a woman, how do we actually start to work on our sex hormones, boost them so that we can have like just mind-blowing sex and really build that incredible desire?
Yeah. Foreplay starts at breakfast. If you want to have sex with a woman, you better start foreplay. If you want to have it at night after dinner, it's got to start at breakfast. And here's why. A woman's sexual drive is largely enhanced by when she is in her prefrontal cortex. When she's in that place of hope and possibility and thinking about the world in a much bigger way, she's going to want to connect with you more. When she's in her amygdala, the stress part of her brain, all of her sexual desire shuts down. So think about a woman who's working all day long. She's at work, stress is high, she's in her amygdala, she's at the wrong time of her cycle, she comes home, and now her spouse wants to have sex. There's nothing about her brain that wants you to touch her at all. So you're gonna need to move her back into her prefrontal cortex by saying nice things to her, asking her about her day, like maybe a foot rub. Like you're gonna have to move her to the right part of her brain. And if you match that with the right time of her cycle, she's going to want to have sex more with you. And for the woman, she's going to enjoy sex more. So the first thing that women need to know is if they're cycling. So this would be women who are in their fertility years or perimenopausal women. Typically, you get testosterone at one time out of the month, which is from about day 10 to day 15 of a woman's cycle. When testosterone comes in, your libido is going to be high. Now, the thing that's also happening at that time of a woman's cycle is that estrogen is at her peak, okay? So estrogen makes us very social and makes us want to connect, verbally connect. So let's start with that. Estrogen makes us very verbal processors. So hold on to that thought for a moment. And then wherever estrogen goes, oxytocin is. So in this 5-day period of our cycle, we have libido, we have an ability to use both sides of our brain, an ability to have great verbal connection, and we've got oxytocin that makes us want to bond. So when it comes to sex, we are ready to go during ovulation if you are still ovulating. So in order to have great sex, you want to use those hormones to your advantage, so do it during that time. Which leads to the challenging question, which is most women don't do it during that time because they don't want to get pregnant if they're in childbearing years. So, but we are hormonally ready to go during that 5-day window. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about for all women, and this is my favorite statement that I tell everybody, is when we don't understand our hormones, behaviors show up that we actually start to own and think it's our problem. Let's use libido as an example. So let's say you're with a man and he has a much higher libido, which makes sense because he's getting testosterone every 15 minutes. He's getting a pulse of testosterone. You're getting it 5 days out of the month. And so you're like, start to think to yourself, wait a second, what's wrong with me? Why am I not attracted to my husband? Why don't I want to have sex with him? He seems to want to have sex with me a lot more than I want to have sex with him. And when you like stop and you think about it, actually, that's how we were hormonally designed. And so let's use our hormones to strengthen this relationship, but we have to know that our hormones are going to do something as simple as change our sexual appetite and we have to look at it from a different direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to pause for a second. You said men get it every 15 minutes and women get it every 5 days out of a month.
Yes.
That's a massive gap right there.
Massive gap. And women don't understand it. And men don't understand it. I was recently lecturing at a conference in Norway, and there were so many men in the room. And when I sat down and explained the menstrual cycle, I explained menopause, I talked about the hormonal differences, I had more men come up to me afterwards and just say, thank you. I totally understand my wife now. I really appreciate you just saying what you said. And I'm going to go teach my son this. And it was like, all of a sudden I had this elevated thought of, if we understood the hormonal differences between men and women, we could strengthen our relationships with men as women, and men, you could strengthen your relationships with women. But you have to understand the hormonal difference first.
Yeah, I love that, because I think even with what we're talking about, it isn't just us understanding ourselves, which we're going to go so deep into our cycle and all of that. But to your point, if we understand men and know, whether we like it or not, every 15 minutes, they're going to get a dose of testosterone. Then again, I think women, we do joke behind the scenes about guys, and it's like, oh, he's always horny. We kind of like dismiss it now because of it. But actually, when you think about it being a hormonal thing, then you can, to your point, figure out how you can start to dance in a beautiful way. So talk to me about, in these 5 days, what is happening from an attractive standpoint and an attracted standpoint?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question, because this is another one. And I want to just say, for my menopausal friends out there, sit tight, because one thing that's really important to understand is, if you understand your hormones when you were cycling, you'll understand why menopause has been so difficult and why postmenopausal years are so challenging. So, for starters, let's talk about the hormones that come in during this 5-day period. Estrogen is at her peak. Okay, so let's think of the biology of this. So why does estrogen peak at that time? Well, you need enough estrogen for an egg to be released. But this is how brilliant the body was designed. This is why, as women, we are so wickedly powerful. If we just understood ourselves, we would blow our own minds. So estrogen comes in to release this egg, but then she makes your skin very smooth. She makes your hair, if you have curly hair, like curly and full. All the mucosal membranes plump up. Why? Because now you look attractive, so that because you were designed to procreate, whether you decide to make that decision or not. You were designed, when an egg is released, to be more attractive, to attract a mate, so that you would reproduce, so the species would continue forward. That's how incredible you were designed. But the other part of that is you also got testosterone, which not only improved your libido, but it improves your motivation and drive. So you're looking better, everything's fuller, you're more attractive, you have more of a desire to want to connect with a mate, and whether it's a man or a woman, you have more of a desire to connect. And all of a sudden, oxytocin comes in. And so you are like looking around for that connection. And from the other perspective, looking in, you're a lot more attractive during that time. Estrogen helps secrete serotonin and dopamine. So you're happy. You're happy, your hair looks great, your skin looks great, you want to connect, you're motivated, you have libido. Come on, like, who doesn't want to hang out with us during that time? Right?
Yeah.
So we need to know that. And then men, or if, even in same-sex relationships, if you realize that there's an ebb and flow to this attraction, this hormonal magnification that happens in us, then even something as like compliment us during that time, or, just acknowledge how powerful we are during this 5-day period. And now we've brought the conversation together. We haven't separated it out or repelled it.
God, we're so freaking smart.
We're so
Our
smart.
bodies are smart. I love how you broke that down. And then my next question then goes to, in the opposite moments, right? Someone gives you a compliment because you feel so great. You're in this 5-day period. You're like, I know, I'm freaking the bomb, right? And you got that cockiness. Yeah,
Thank
exactly. You get more confident, I think.
Yeah.
But then there are other moments where a guy may compliment you and there's, oh, you look really nice. And he's like, what, I didn't look like nice yesterday? And so,
interesting.
So well, talk to me though about that time of the month where now you're more irritable, things don't sit well with you. In fact, actually, it would probably behoove us to go through the cycle.
Yeah, we should go through the cycle.
Because the reason why I want to bring this point up is if you feel really confident in one day and you feel amazing and then a few days later you feel really bad and you're irritable, it is because of your hormone cycle, and it isn't because you're going crazy or that like you're moody. I mean, maybe you are in a mood, but I think again we bucket people into, well, she's a bitch.
Right. Yeah. And there's certain times of the month we're supposed to be a bitch.
Well, let's talk about that. All right, so take us
we
through
are
the cycle.
hormonally designed. We're hormonally designed to have a bitchy time. And we're hormonally designed to be loving and nurturing and really sweet. That's how we are designed. So if you're having trouble understanding us, understand our hormones again, and then you'll understand why our personality changes. And I think we should walk through the cycle. I think that's the best way to understand it. The one comment I really want to make on this, that for the younger audience listening, I have a 23-year-old daughter, and we talk hormones a lot. And she was just noticing how her moods were up and down, and she was very irritable one day, and of course lashed out at mom because that's a safe place to do it. And she came back to me later, and she's like, "I'm so sorry." Like 2 days later, she said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know why. Like, I get irritable and I'm so emotional." And I turned to her and I said, "Because you're a woman. That's why. You were designed to be emotional. So I get it. And we can, on those bad days, we can have a better conversation, but don't shy away from how you were designed." And I think that is, like, men are very linear and they're very steady Eddie kind of mentality. And women were like, your best friend, and then we hate you. And that's because that's how we're designed. So I just had to put that out there to free people from thinking that there's something wrong with them when they're happy one day and sad the next. Okay, so here's how the cycle works. Day 1 through day 10, you're building estrogen. And when estrogen is building, usually it takes a couple of days to transition from, the PMS and the week before into actually bleeding. But the first 2 days of our cycle is actually a really interesting time period because all the hormones have crashed and estrogen is about to build. And so in those first 2 days, you actually have the most access to the right and the left brain in the first 2 days of your cycle. So
that's as in the first 2 days is like the first days when you start to bleed.
Yeah, when you start to bleed. Good point, because most people don't know what day 1 of their cycle is. Day 1 of your cycle is when you bleed. Those first 2 days, you are going to be highly intuitive. Because you have access to both sides of your brain before your body starts to build estrogen for the days following that. Great time to listen to that inner voice on those first 2 days, because hormonally you are getting more access to more parts of your brain.
And how can we use that? Because as we go through this, I want to be able to say, how do we use that in the real world? So how do we use, let's say, those first 2 days, knowing that both sides of our brain are active and we're more intuitive? What do you suggest that we can do in the real world?
Yeah. Well, if you're an entrepreneur or, you want to create something, go within. This is a time to go within and think about what perhaps you want to create in your business. You could do the same thing with yourself. What do you want to create in your life? I've been deeply thinking lately about a question for my own self, which actually my therapist asked me and I couldn't answer, which was, who's the authentic version of you? Who is the real Mindy? Who is the real version? If you take all the external away, who is that authentic person in there? And I couldn't answer it. I couldn't give a label to it So now thinking that through, if I had a cycle, those first 2 days would be a good time to go within and ask those deep questions of yourself, because you have more access to your brain, so you might have a greater ability to answer them.
Okay. And then in those first 2 days, how is your relationship? Let's say you're with a partner. How does that impact them? Are you more likely to be more distant to them or actually more connected to them?
When we go all the way through the cycle, if you do the back half of the cycle really well, once your period starts, it's kind of a non-event. But most women would tell you, that's not my period. My period, the first 2 days, I'm like, get away. And I think the getaway idea is because you didn't rest and recover the week before your period, mixed with this highly intuitive time, which would make you more inner. So for the partner, what I'd want the partner to know is to listen to us and see what we need. But most likely we're going to still need to be a little bit separate and not in the group or not in relationship with you, because we're still in this very inner place. But if you do the back half of your cycle right, once your period starts, what we're seeing is that women don't typically have tough cycles. So, which is really interesting. So anyway, so that's the first 2 days. But what I want people to know most of the time is that, or the most important part of that first 10 days is estrogen's building. And what's really neat about estrogen is that it does so many things for us, like helps make serotonin and makes dopamine and makes acetylcholine, which helps us cognitively, and helps stimulate BDNF, which makes it a great time to learn. So after we finish the first 2 days of being more inner, we actually come out and we're much more outer. And we want to socialize and we want to connect, and we can cortisol. If stress is high, estrogen doesn't care. And so all of a sudden we can stress out and estrogen's like, no problem. I got it. Like I can still show up in all my glory, and we can still be outgoing. We can still take over the world because I gave you all these other neurotransmitters when I decided to show up. The greatest version of your life could show up during that 10 days because you will have so many neurochemicals that are appearing. So the other thing about that time period is this is where fasting works, and this is where the ketogenic diet worked for women, and this is where exercising hard works for women.
Like weights.
Yeah, like we're meant to be more outward once estrogen starts to build. It's when we start to go through the rest of the cycle that everything changes. So, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. And then I'm going to want to relink it to, okay, so that's the moment that you can lift heavy weights, go hard at the gym, go hard in your business, I assume, like do those deals that maybe you were nervous to make, or you've just got the more confidence. Yeah. Okay, and then what about that, the dynamic in your relationship?
Yeah, so we're going to be great verbal processors. So the interesting one on this is I had a father come to me one day and ask me, he was struggling with his teenage daughter. And he's like, I just can't seem to get through to her. And I said, well, when are you talking to her? Do you know what part of her cycle you're talking to her at? And he's like, no, why would that be important? And I said, because you need her hormones to be in the right place in order to actually get in, especially a teenage brain, get into her brain to be open enough to be able to talk to you. And so those 10 days, as estrogen is building, you're going to see a much more open and receptive human. And if you have a conflict, if you're trying to get with a woman and get to her heart or have a deeper experience with her, that first half is when you want to do it, not the back half. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that.
So I tend to think of it like we come out of our shell and we're like, here, connect with us, be with us. I want to laugh with you. I want to dream up wild dreams with you. I want to have a relationship with you. That's what estrogen is saying. Mm-hmm. And so, but then when we get at the back half, when we get into progesterone's saying, leave me alone. I just need to nurture myself right now. Don't give me any stress. I'm just in a more inner mood.
Okay, so those 10 days, it's crush it at work, have those hard conversations with your partner, go on dates?
That would be one of the better times. When we get to ovulation, that's our superpower moment.
All right.
So
I love that. I'm such a geek. I love all this so much.
yeah, but we are much more gregarious.
Yeah.
And for what women, I called it the power phase in Fast Like a Girl, because anything you want to power up on, power up during that time. Your hormone, you are locked and loaded. Your hormones are going to be ready to go in these power phases. So use them to your advantage.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then the manifestation phase is what I called it, this ovulation window from day 10 to day 15. So estrogen's already at her peak. So we already talked about how she makes you more beautiful. So testosterone comes in, so you have motivation and drive, and you have libido, and you get a little bit of progesterone that calms you. This is literally the most powerful moment of our cycle. During the pandemic, I was like, if we just put all the ovulating women in one room and let them all figure out what we do right now, we would be out of this situation. Right?
Yeah.
But we didn't do it. We didn't, like literally, if you have a company, I've talked to female CEOs, and I'm like, who have a large large amount of female employees. I always say, if you could figure out how to put all the ovulating women into one room and then brainstorm your business and figure out new projects. She's got estrogen at a peak. She's got testosterone at a peak. She's got progesterone. Like, see what comes out of her mouth during that time. Like, and brainstorm all together. I wish I'd known this when I had a cycle. Like, I would have totally honored this a lot more. But we are the most creative. We have the most insight. We are motivated to do something with that. So start a workout plan. Start a new business idea. Great time, to start anything new that you want, because you have so many hormones there to support you. The reason that I love to give as much descriptive detail to these phases is what I'm hoping women will do is now observe yourself and notice that you actually, that what I'm saying, you're more motivated. When I say that, just notice if there's a pattern to your motivation. And then once you notice the pattern to your motivation, does it follow the pattern of your cycle? And what I'm finding is most women go, yeah, oh my gosh, I never knew that. So during ovulation, for the creatives out there, are you the most creative during that time? Are you the most verbal? It could be as simple as, do you want to talk a lot during ovulation? It could be as simple as, do you find yourself wanting to start a new workout plan and lift heavier weights during that time, which you should, by the way, use that testosterone to build muscle. So we have never had this level of conversation around hormones in our culture before. It's starting to bubble up, and women are starting to go, that makes sense, because it's our intuitive knowing. But because we haven't had this level of conversation, women are not acknowledging that these subtleties within their personalities and their behaviors that match the hormonal ebbs and flows. You might feel you're more bold during your manifestation ovulation period. And I say, go girl. Yes, you are more bold because you are hormonally superior. I'm just gonna say that.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
that you are literally hormonally superior at that moment. There's no other part of a man's day or month where he gets all three hormones like that. So even though we might love that he gets 15 minutes of testosterone, like I am a little envious of that. I'd love to have testosterone show up every 15 minutes, but I wouldn't swap it out for what happens to us during that ovulation time.
Yeah.
So that's day 15. So you have all these hormones peak, and then they come crashing down for about 4 or 5 days. This post-ovulation is really interesting. So I called it another power phase in the book because I really wanted women to know, if you want to work out hard, you want to fast longer, you want to use that as a tool for healing, that would be another good moment. So it's first power phase is day 1 to day 10. Second power phase is day 16 to day 19 of a cycle. But if I wanted, I didn't write about this in the book, but a deeper conversation to have, I think, for women during that down period is after all these hormones have come up, We got to get rid of those hormones. We got to get them out of our system. So things like breast cancer and ovarian cancer don't happen. So a lot of women say they feel bloated, that breast tenderness, they feel, I call it padded, where they're like, I feel like I'm just a little padded right now, and brain fog. And that can be because they just didn't get rid of estrogen and they didn't get rid of all those hormones. So we've got to think about like gut health and support the liver. It might be a time you don't drink because you got to support that liver a little bit more. You might eat more bitter foods like radicchio and drink more like ginger juice and lemon juice and lean into things that can support those two organs so that you can clear out, get those hormones out of your system. Might be that that's the time you do an infrared sauna or you go for a little bit of a longer run so you're sweating more. But you got to get rid of those hormones, otherwise your body stores them.
Wow, okay, so it kind of sucks that happens right after your power, like your confidence. Yeah. And I think that that's where I was like, well, if you really feel like a badass, right, and you go in and you're crushing it, and then within like a day or two, if you have that crash, that dip, as you said, that's where I think a lot of our internal voices start to say like, oh, maybe you didn't actually have the confidence, or, you know, or see, you are going crazy. One minute you were happy, next minute you're sad. I'm all over the place. And that's where, unfortunately, men also use it as a, like, I don't want to say excuse, but they do then label you. It's like, oh, you're crazy, you know? And I think it's the fluctuation of going from one to the other that can be confusing for ourselves and for other people.
Right, like how could I be so certain 2 days ago?
Right.
And now I'm doubting myself. Yes, really good point, because this is what we have to free women from, is because hormonally when testosterone came in, you were like, yeah, I'm very clear that I can do this, 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 and this. And then testosterone goes away and estrogen went away, and now you're uncertain. Don't listen to yourself during that time. Don't listen to those uncertainties. You just had a hormonal drop. So what we see is most women will tell me like day 16, 17, they feel like they've been dropped from the top of a building. They're like, I was doing so great. Like my diet was great. My exercise was great. I was kicking butt at work. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, I just don't feel good anymore. I feel like, and I don't know why all of a sudden my mood changed. It's because all those hormones came crashing down. And this is where we have to understand ourselves. So, you know, there's several ways you can look at these ups and downs. And one is understand yourself first. And the second is what's the lifestyle you need to live to be able to support these ups and downs. So when I say, okay, understand that you might have felt bold 2 days ago and now you don't feel bold. Okay, that's important. So I can talk kindly to myself. But then I can also come over here and I can say, okay, what do I need to do to support these hormones to move through me, which is where the liver and the gut and all that comes in.
So that's where you then change, potentially eat certain foods. And then how do you, because I love this so much, understanding myself then allows me to act in accordance. Instead of judging myself, how do I communicate with my partner? How do I, when I go to bed at night, how am I replaying that day? And I think even in the replaying of the day, you can beat yourself up over all the things that you've done. Or you can go, oh, well, you just need to give yourself grace because you're in this period of your cycle.
In the replaying of the day, you just gave me an idea. In the replaying of the day, what if the first question is, okay, what day of my cycle am I on? And then, oh, okay, I'm on day 15. Oh, no wonder I was really bold today. I shocked myself when I stood up in that meeting and I said what I actually, felt. And just to acknowledge that there was a hormonal influence that was going on that was helping you in that moment. And then maybe 2 days later, you're replaying the day and you're like, God, I was so bold 2 days ago. And I got back into that meeting and I couldn't stand up for myself again. Why was that? Oh, okay, hormonally, I was in a different place. So the only reason I bring that, it's not an excuse. It's so we stop turning on ourselves. I don't understand why, as women, we let our own voices are our biggest distraction, that we turn on ourselves because we don't understand ourselves. And that is the worst health habit we could possibly impart.
I think we turn on ourselves because we maybe see men that don't have that problem. And so we think there's something wrong with us versus like, he doesn't have that problem. He shows up every day at work and he's freaking confident as hell. And all of a sudden I'm like, I can't find my voice and I can't speak up for myself.
That's right.
Or even in a relationship, you have arguments or you have discussions and it's like your partner could, if you're, heterosexual relationship, they can turn up and they're just as strong in this moment that they were 3 days ago.
That's right.
And now you're backing down. So how do you communicate? I'm always going to keep going back to so understanding ourselves, and then how do you communicate that with, let's say, somebody that you're with, a partner, and what do you suggest that they can do to help you, as well as the things that you mentioned that we can do for ourselves?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to say, to take ownership over it and to make I statements. I think if it's day 17 and let's say you're in a discussion with your partner and you're not feeling clarity and you're not feeling powerful, you just say, today, where I am at hormonally, I'd like to table this discussion and come back to it at another time so I can bring the best of me to this situation that we have at hand or this conflict that we're trying to resolve. I think it's a way of saying, I just am not in a hormonal place right now to be able to navigate this moment. It's not your fault, but give me some time and I'll come back and now we can have a different discussion. As opposed to what we typically do, or what a lot of people do, is we go, you're irritating me today, this, that, and we turn it outward and we blame the people around us instead of having some ownership of the changes that are occurring within us hormonally.
That's so true.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it just makes it a compassionate discussion. I've done this through all my menopausal years with my husband. I know that on a day that I have a lot of podcast interviews or a lot of videos that I'm doing, or I've been writing all day, it takes a lot of testosterone to do that. And so as a menopausal woman, I know that my testosterone's lower than it was, 30 years ago. And so at the end of the day, I just need a moment to just kind of sit by myself and recalibrate my hormones. So I often will tell my husband when he wants to bring me something stressful that happened that day, I'll say, it's been a testosterone-driven day for me. And I need to just sit for a moment and let my mind rest. I'll come back to you in an hour and we can have this discussion. That's compassion, in my opinion.
You're on your way to a hot date, you got your sexy pants on and you feel great. You eat the bread, you drink some wine, just living your freaking best life. When suddenly, stomach pain starts to strike. Guys, I freaking get it. I've literally felt your pain. Literally, stomach cramps, bloating, gas, discomfort. These are all freaking signs that your gut is saying something isn't right and your confidence takes a freaking nosedive. But thankfully, we can fix a lot of these issues, guys, with today's sponsor, Bilyeu, and their simple at-home gut health test. Simply collect and ship your sample and you'll get results in 2 to 3 weeks via the app. See your 20 integrative health scores that foods are good and bad for your biome, and so much more. My homie, don't let an imbalanced gut keep you from feeling like a badass. Bilyeu is offering $110 off your test right now. Take control of your health today with Bilyeu. I would have a massive calendar. Literally after this talk, I'm going to put a big calendar. I mean, I need to get my period back, but that's something we'll talk about later.
Yeah, we can talk
but
about
I would preempt things. I would, so how we're talking about, at the end of the day, I would replay and I would preempt everything. And I would put on the calendar time to chat.
Yeah.
Time to just make me a tea and leave me alone.
Yes.
Time to give me cuddles.
Yes.
Times for us to actually have this hard discussion that we've been meaning to have.
Yeah.
And I would just plan it out and then prepare my partner for that plan so that they also know, in those moments how to navigate, because and I love that you said this really hit me really hard, where you said, this isn't a moment to just blame people.
Right.
I'm such a take ownership person,
Yes.
how I show up every day.
Yes.
And so knowing I can take ownership, not blame someone else, but have compassion for myself is so freaking strong.
Yes. This ties into what we were talking about hours ago, which is this concept of feminism right now. I think that the feminist movement had a bit of an aggressiveness to it. And I'm not saying that we don't need to shout from the rooftops, but I think once we understand ourselves, then what we can do is we can speak from that language with power. And to me, that is true feminism. When I can say my female body right now is going to show up this way. And so what you're wanting from me is a mismatch to how my female body is performing right now. So I need you to table this until I'm in a different hormonal place. That is feminism to me. And sometimes that requires that you say, I can't do something, which is for powerful women, I can't do something feels like a weakness. It is not a weakness. It is a strength to say, at this moment, hormonally where I'm at, I need to take care of myself this way, and I will come back to you. In the workplace, let's just use the workplace as an example. I actually believe that the work week works really well for men. It does not work great for women. We should have a work month, and this is what the work month would look like. It would look like first 10 days, well, actually like the first 15 days. Yeah, we could work overtime. We're creative. We have all these hormones. We're ready to go. We could work the weekends. Like we're your gal. Like we are really powerful. We are equal at that point as far as what we are capable of doing in the length of a work day and capacity of work. Then we start to see around day 16, day 17, our hormones are dropping, and all of a sudden progesterone's going to build.
Do you mind explaining what progesterone is for people?
So progesterone starts to build around day 20 of the menstrual cycle, and it's what allows the uterine lining to shed. So when you don't have a period, it's possible that progesterone is not getting high enough to allow that uterine lining to shed.
Got it.
So, but progesterone also stimulates a neurotransmitter called GABA, and GABA calms us. So, and progesterone also doesn't like when cortisol shows up. When cortisol shows up, she gets shy, is what I always say. When cortisol goes high, progesterone becomes shy.
And that's the stress hormone.
Yeah, and that's cortisol is the stress hormone. So what ends up happening during that period of time, that week before our period, we are meant to nurture ourselves more. We're meant to slow down. So a typical work month would look like the front half of our cycle, we would be the badasses that we are. And then the closer to the back half, especially that week before the period, we actually wouldn't work as much. We might take more time off. Maybe we don't go 100%. Maybe we go 75%, but just so we can rest and recover, so we can come out and be a badass again on day one. So I don't know how you would create equal work weeks, because that would be a work month and men.
Yeah, that's so true.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so how do you allow a woman in the workplace to thrive knowing that she has this expansion and contraction and this ability to do everything possible and an ability to have to recover? Like, how do we create an environment where women's hormones are taken into consideration?
Yeah. I don't have an answer for you yet.
Yeah.
But I think that with everything you're teaching, I think is definitely moving us in the direction to be able to speak about this.
Yeah.
So that we can set women up for success so they can be badasses, crush it, own amazing businesses, or, you know, have beautiful relationships and not always second guess themselves.
That's right.
I mean, part of my health issues that I've been fighting for 8 years. Like, I need people to know where the context that I'm coming from. For 8 years, I've been struggling with the worst health issues possible. And that is because for 10 years, when we were building Quest, I was around guys who were entrepreneurs, so they were already experienced, talk about being insecure. They were guys, and they could work 17 hours a day and not falter. Now, me, with my mindset and how I was perceived, is that, Lisa, you've got to work just as hard as they have.
Yes.
And I didn't give myself grace. I didn't give myself a day off. I worked just as hard as them. I was, not like timing myself, but I made sure that I showed up when they showed up, so that I could be an equal.
Yeah.
And that was detrimental to my health.
Right.
And so in thinking that I'm the same as them, set me up for massive health issues. So understanding that we have the capability, to your point, of showing up equal, but not in the same way.
Yes. That is the classic example. And this is where feminism got it wrong. Because Rosie the River was like, we can do it. we should have put a little asterisk. We could do it just differently.
During this time of your cycle.
Day 1 through day 15, we can do it. But don't talk to us on day 20, please. No, but this is, to me, this is our moment. I think you feel it. Like, I think a lot of women are feeling like the conversations are changing. We have access to so many things. We are showing up in so many environments where we weren't allowed to show up before. And here we are. Okay, we have to do it a woman's way. We have to do it a woman's way. Otherwise, the conversation, I'll come back in 5 years and the conversation is going to be like, oh my God, the health of women is getting worse and worse and worse. So to your example of you were in an environment with men, let's go back and repattern what that environment could have looked like for you. It could have looked like, hey guys, let's say if you had an active cycle during that time, hey, my period's coming in the next couple of days. I'm going to be cutting work in half for the next 3 days. And resting and recovering, and I'll be back once on day 1, once my cycle starts. And then on day 1, you come back and they get the best version of you. You are like working your 20 hours every day. You can handle it. And then you do the whole cycle again, and then you go back into that reparative mode. They would have actually gotten a better version of you in that. You probably would have been more effective, and you wouldn't have destroyed your health.
I know that's why I think this discussion is so important, and I want to make sure that people know that we are such fans of women, and so this is all to empower.
Yes.
And so but I always want the truth. That's the thing. It's like having gone through my health issues. You want to talk about the worst time of my relationship,
right?
Because I didn't feel sexy.
Yeah.
I didn't want sex.
Yeah.
I was so inflamed. My gut was so protruding that I couldn't stand up for longer than 5 minutes at a time. I was 20 pounds lighter than you see me now. My hair was falling out. My nails were brittle. Yeah. And so I did that to myself. Like, I take ownership over that. I had a bad relationship with food. I was taking a lot of antibiotics because I wasn't replenishing my gut. And so it affected my relationship. It affected my confidence.
Yep.
I was hyper emotional all the time. I couldn't control them. Yep. And I wouldn't wish that on any woman. No. I really wouldn't. And I think it was because of my own mindset that got me into that. And without knowledge like what you're teaching today, I didn't have that. I didn't understand it.
Right.
And so if we can give people the tools to never get there so that you can have thriving relationships, amazing businesses, and feel great about yourself and, be confident, I think that is a beautiful gift that women can totally own for themselves instead of externally waiting for someone to give it to them.
Yeah. And here's a question back to you on that time period. I mean, I think there's a deep fear of women to admit a weakness. Like I need rest would be like a weakness.
Honestly, when you said that, when you said it earlier, I was really worried. Yeah. I was like, whew, even knowing myself, even saying all of that's just happened to me, I'm like, that's going to be hard for me to say. It would be hard for me to say to my husband, I can't talk about this for a few days because of my hormones. I can't do this job because of my hormones. Like, that would be very hard. But I'm so goal-oriented that if you say, what is my goal? How am I going to get there? Whether it's a business, whether it's, let's say you want to run a marathon, whether it's you want to have a beautiful relationship. In order for me to get there, I say, what do I have to do? And my girl Mindy is sitting right here telling me exactly what I have to do. I would be foolish to ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. So I came up with a term because we're kind of from the same thread, because I'm like, you give me any task, I can put my head down and I'm a workhorse. I can make it happen. And I don't know how to rest. I have struggled with how to rest. And the more I have understood hormones, the more I'm like, you have to rest, Mindy. So I came up with a phrase one day in this self-talk where I was like, you have to rest, you have to relax. And my brain was like, no, you're lazy. You have a long list of things you need to do. The house is a mess. You've got 3 books you're writing. You've got YouTube videos. You got to map out. What are you resting for? And I think a lot of women have that panic. I can't rest. So I came up with this phrase that I'm courageously resting. And I was like, oh, when I put courageous in front of rest, now the badass version of me is like, yep, I'm courageously resting right now. Can't you see that?
Bring me my slippers.
Yeah, bring me my slippers, rub my feet, maybe a glass of wine, because I am such a badass that I'm resting.
I love that.
It worked for me.
That's so good.
And then, so if you struggle with rest, just put courageous on the front of it, and now you're a badass resting.
That's amazing. I love that so much.
And so, but this is what if you think of the trajectory of women, we fought so hard to be at this moment in time. The thought of the fact that this moment in time is destroying our health is horrible to think about. But not if we just pause and go, wait a second, we fought so hard to be here. We have equality like we've never seen before. Now let's do it a woman's way. Let's take this moment and launch into a place where we are working every part of our life in accordance with our hormones. And now let's see what we're capable of doing.
Hell yeah, girl.
Right?
Yeah, I love this. Okay, so you just mentioned wine.
Yes.
What are the things, I'm going to go back to the things that we battle with, and then you bring in the beautiful truth so we don't ever beat ourselves up.
Okay.
So cravings. That's such a big thing. And if we have the discipline, right, between, day 5 and day 10?
Yeah.
If we have the discipline then, and then we quote fall off the wagon and we start to binge, or we, enjoy things that maybe like we think we shouldn't have, sugar, alcohol, things like that. What is happening to the body? Yeah. And why can we give ourselves grace when we want the chocolate bar?
Yeah. Okay. So estrogen comes in the first part of the cycle. Estrogen likes glucose to be low. So this is why every diet you've ever done most likely worked in the front half of your cycle, because estrogen does okay with that deprivation. Progesterone doesn't. So progesterone comes in starting on day 20. She is completely the opposite of estrogen. And so when cortisol goes up, she's like, no, I'm out. But she also needs glucose to be high. So she gives you cravings of carbohydrates, which how many of us the week before our periods are like, I just want to eat pasta, bowl of pasta, and a piece of chocolate cake. And maybe after that, maybe then I'll throw in a bowl of fruit. But we don't go like, I want a salad before my period. We want carbs. We crave carbs. Okay, if we just look at that, of course you crave carbs. Progesterone saying, bring glucose up. Like, girl, give me more glucose so I can make my appearance. So you need to bring, and we see this on continuous glucose monitors that we've watched over hundreds of thousands of women. And so many women will say, I wasn't doing anything, and all of a sudden glucose went up. And I'll say, well, when's your period? And they're like, oh, that's next week. I'm like, yeah, because your brilliant body is dumping glucose out of the system, giving you cravings for carbohydrates. So you bring glucose up because it's like a chemistry experiment so that you can be able to make progesterone so that uterine lining can shed. Okay, but what do we do when we crave something the week before our period? We I can't stick to my diet. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I was doing so well on my anti-sugar diet. Now all of a sudden I want sugar. It's because the body is requiring something different from you because of progesterone. So I'd start there. Now chocolate's another one. Why do we crave chocolate the week before our period? Because it's rich in magnesium, and magnesium is one of the most important minerals to be able to make progesterone. So the cravings change that week before because that's what progesterone demands. Which again, but then we turn on ourselves and we're like, I did the diet so well for 3 weeks and now I can't stick with it. Or the other thing, I don't feel like working out the week before my period. Well, of course, because you're supposed to nurture and go within, and you don't want working out raises cortisol. And so you're not supposed to work out really hard the week before your period. So it's a time that things dramatically shift. And again, we're not honoring that.
Is this everything then that contributes to really heavy period pains and things like that?
Yeah. So this is where we kind of started this was, Well, what do we do with the woman who says, well, the first 2 days of my cycle, I feel horrible. I'm supposed to feel great. I'm intuitive and outgoing. No, like, I don't feel that. Okay, well, then my next question is, well, what did you do the week before your period?
Right.
Because if you go in day 20 and you're like working out really hard, you're working hard, you're not raising glucose up enough, cortisol is high, progesterone is like, she's slowly making her appearance, but she's agitated and irritable, and you don't have enough to make GABA, that's what she'll stimulate. So you're edgy, you're irritable, and then your period starts, and there wasn't enough progesterone, the complete version of progesterone. So you're hemorrhaging, you're clotting because you didn't honor that week before.
Oh, yeah, everything's just clicked into place. Yeah.
So again, like if I could think about it, it's like an expansion. Here I am in the beginning of my cycle. And then I'm like, we should probably put on like, well, we could do like our Wonder Woman wings when we're during manifestation phase, like during ovulation, like I'm locked and loaded, so powerful, use me. And then, okay, now I need to take care of myself. And so I go into this place at the back half of my cycle. I need to take care of myself. I need to nurture myself. I need to kind of go within for a moment. I'll be right back. And then your period starts and you're like, I'm back. The powerful version of me is back. Now let's go. Yeah. Right? And then as we get closer to that back half, okay, let me nurture myself again. Like, to me, that's how I see the ebbs and flows for women, how it should be.
Yeah. God, that's so freaking powerful. So what is the pill doing? As in contraception, the pill, what is that doing to this cycle? Because when I started taking the pill, I was around 16. And then my period stopped about 10 years ago. And I went to the doctor and I was like, oh, and they're like, oh, you're on the pill, it's fine, you don't need a period, which makes me think it's messing with my hormones.
Yeah.
So I think so many people were taught, especially if you're my age, I'm 44, so many people were taught to, oh, you take the pill when you're young. If you're having a heavy period, take the pill.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got problems with your cycle, take the pill.
Yeah. So one of the challenges, the key part in that was that you started at 16. So when did you start your period?
At like 14?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the life cycle of hormones is that when we go into puberty, like at 14, which, by the way, I was just at a party last night and a book party, and a bunch of moms were talking about how we are now declaring that it's normal for 10-year-olds to get their period. That is not normal. That is environmental. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. That is not normal. So 13, 14 is about the normal age to start your period. So for those first 4 to 5 years, your hypothalamus and pituitary, the master control system of hormones, and your ovaries, they're getting to know each other. There's so many hormones that have to be secreted it's a communication system. So it takes a good 5 years for that communication system to really get well integrated. At 16, you come in with birth control and you mess the communication up. And so now there's no natural communication. It's all been manipulated by an exogenous pill source. So now how long you were on that for, let's just say 20 years until like 35. And then you're like, I'm out. Okay, I'm off the pill. But there was no natural communication that ever got enough time to be established between the brain and your ovaries. So this is why Fast Like a Girl, in there, I have a fasting cycle where I talk about eat like this during certain times and fast it like this during certain times. And one of the things that has surprised me more than anything putting this book out into the world is how many women are getting their cycles back.
Just because of the way they're eating.
That's right.
Wow.
Because now they're living in accordance to their hormones. And so their body's getting a rhythm again, an internal rhythm. And I would say the same thing to you. Let's figure out, let's help you get an internal rhythm. And a lot of times people say, well, how do you find that internal rhythm if you don't have a period? And there's a lot of little ways we can look at that. But sometimes you just start a rhythm and watch where your body goes to help reestablish what should have been there at 16 years old, but got hijacked by the pill. This is what's happening to so many younger women right now. The 20s and the 30-year-olds are like, my heart is hurting for them right now. Infertility is on such a high rate, higher than ever before. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is happening to so many women because we are not living in accordance to the rhythms of our hormones. And the pill is one thing that hijacks it. The patriarch is another thing that hijacks it. And then we don't understand it. And so we just start blaming ourselves.
When you say the patriarch hijacks it, what do you mean?
To me, the patriarch is anything that has power over us. So, the corporate world, so many women living in the corporate world, there's no understanding of how to ebb and flow, everything we've been talking about. Healthcare system. How many times do we walk into our doctor's office and we express a symptom? Do they ever ask you what part of your cycle you're at?
No, never.
Right? And then we have whatever we would call the social culture that doesn't say, oh, you can be gregarious at certain points and then you need to rest at other points. So it's to me, the way the world we're living in right now works very much for men and not for women.
And so many studies are basically done on men and not women. And that's why I love your book, Fast Like a Girl, and what you talk about, because when I started to intermittent fast a good few years ago now, every study, I was like, oh, okay, so I'll just do this. And I looked at my husband and he was having a much easier time than I was. And then, of course, then it goes the aha moment where it's like, oh, because 99.999% of the studies are actually done on men and they're not considering our cycles when they're talking about fasting.
Yeah, and it's when you get into the study part, you get really mad because you start, not only do they do it on men, but when they do mice, when we talk about a mouse study, usually it's a male mice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
that never even dawned on me.
So like, I know, we never even think about like the sex of the animal they're using. So what I always say, and this is a large reason why I wrote Fast Like a Girl, is because I saw this trend of fasting that was working so well for so many people. And I was teaching to my patients, I was teaching to my online community how to take these studies and interpret them for a woman's brain and a woman's hormonal lens. While the media was out there saying fasting is not good for women, keto is not good for women. And so we had this like women going, really, like, this tool was so cool. I was losing weight, but I guess you're right, because I did lose my period too. Well, and then let me see what the studies say. Well, the studies, we don't have anything that the studies say because we haven't done it on women. So I tried to gather all that data and weed through it through a woman's lens and look at it hormonally. And so even the studies that I quote in the book, I always say they get us in the ballpark. But now as a woman, you get to choose what seat you're going to sit at. So you can say, yes, a 16-hour fast is great for metabolic health and it'll help me lose weight. But you also get to say, and I'm not going to do it the week before my period.
But you actually mentioned weight loss as well earlier. Yeah. Talk to me about the difference between fasting and a fad diet. I grew up in a family where my mum was borderline anorexic. And so I very much saw her eat very little, one meal a day, the small amount as possible. And again, like I said, one meal a day. And so I learned that behavior. I very much had body dysmorphia growing up. And so I was very susceptible to, what can I do to lose weight? What can I do to stay skinny? And so I want to make sure that like how you talk about fasting is so beautiful, but that's why I want to talk about it, because I actually want to have the open discussion about how some people are labeling fasting as just another eating disorder in disguise.
And thank you for bringing this up, because I think the most important thing to understand about fasting is it's not a diet. It is you are tapping into another metabolic pathway. And let me explain. So we have two ways we make energy. One is when we eat food, and one is when we go without food. I call the one when we eat food the sugar burner system. And so every time you eat, your glucose goes up and your metabolism is operating from that system. And when your blood sugar goes down and stays down for 8 hours or longer, you switch over into the fat burning system and your body starts to make another fuel source, and it's called a ketone. And this ketone is made by burning fat. So now people who are really thin will say, well, where's the fat coming from? You still have fat around internal organs that your body is going to burn in order to make a ketone. So you are like a hybrid car. You are meant to have glucose and you are meant to have ketones. Your brain requires 50% glucose, 50% ketones.
Wow, that much?
Yeah.
Wow.
So when we are not metabolically switching in and out of food and fasting, we are depriving our brain of 50% of its fuel source. So metabolic switching is, in my opinion, for both men and women, it creates the end of dieting and the end of calorie counting. When you truly understand that food can be medicine and you can eat food without counting calories, without even counting macros, with just enjoying food and good quality food, and you can match that with then going longer periods without food, go at least 12, 13 hours without food, you are getting the best of both worlds. And now for women, we have to learn how to metabolically switch according to our hormones. That's the only side conversation that involves women in that one. And so what was happening in the fasting world is that men were getting these incredible results because all of a sudden they all discovered the fat burning system. And I'm sure this happened with Tom. And he was like, oh my God, look at how much weight I'm feeling so good, and it's because he discovered in intermittent fasting this whole world of healing that was happening and the fat burning piece of that. And then he would switch back and eat good quality food and you would go back and forth. You are probably not experiencing that because you weren't mapping that to where your hormones were at.
No, what a surprise. I was doing the same as Tom.
That's right.
Every day I was doing exactly the same.
Right. That's right. So this is why diets don't work, because diets are only working within the sugar burner system. So we can spend, when I got a hold of this, I was like, oh my God, like how, as a culture, how many times have we been like, Whole30, that was an amazing diet. Yeah, it was an amazing diet. Vegan, it's amazing. Yeah, plant-based living has some really cool concepts. Carnivore, oh my God, I went on carnivore and all this happened. Yeah, there's some really interesting things in there. Maybe you go on a prepackaged food. I won't throw any industries down here, but maybe
we all know who you're talking about, Mindy.
You go on a prepackaged food that you think you eat all that prepackaged food and you're going to lose a bunch of weight. And all that discussion is the sugar burner system. You will continue to fail at every single diet if all you're trying to do is manipulate food. So how about we bring in the timing of food and when you eat? And when we do that, when we leave longer periods for the body to rest and recover from not eating, all of a sudden you free yourself when you're eating. So we have to stop the dieting conversation. Food is medicine. Let's eat healthy food. And there are times to go higher in carbs and there's times to go in lower carbs. And let's pair that with different length fasting windows. Sometimes you might want to fast 12 hours. Sometimes you might not want to fast. Sometimes you might want to go 2 days. But let's take those concepts and let's now learn how to go in and out of these two energy systems. And let's do it according to your hormones and you will never diet again.
So I intermittent fast, I was telling you earlier. I haven't done it though to a cycle because also I haven't had to cycle in a while. So I just do it every day. And I kind of I had an app that I was looking at and it was great, but I realized I was becoming addicted again. And again, I try never to judge myself. I just go always to then catch myself. Because now my North Star is health. That is it. It isn't about my weight. It isn't about how I look. It's like, I need to be healthy because I want to live till I'm 100. I actually mean that. So in order to live till I'm 100, what do I have to do now in my 40s? I actually wish I'd done in my 20s and 30s, but I can't go backwards in time. So how can we start to use this now in our cycles And when is the best times to do intermittent fasting?
Yeah. So when intermittent fasting works really well for estrogen. So if you are trying to clean up estrogens, the estrogen system, intermittent fast, you can fast as long as you want. So day 1, and we'll talk about if you don't have a cycle here in a moment and how you would specifically do it. So, but day 1 through about day 10, primarily, you can go on to some longer fasts. So somebody with a gut problem, I would say during that time, let's throw in a 24-hour fast, because a 24-hour fast actually will get your body making intestinal stem cells. And intestinal stem cells go in and repair the inner lining of the gut. And a 24-hour fast actually also will make sure that the microbes in your gut, they call it geographical relocation, they start to spread out. So now when you go back into food, you're actually pulling more nutrients out of your food. So there's like a whole bunch of microbial changes that can happen in a 24-hour fast. So if I was coaching you right now, I'd be like, okay, let's throw that in the first 10 days, at least somewhere in there, a 24-hour fast so we can repair your gut. So that, and again, we'll map this to something since you don't have a cycle. But that's where fasting really shines. Now you go into the ovulation window, or what I called manifestation. Okay, you have all these hormones, they're there. We've already determined you're powerful. So, but you don't want to fast too long there. There's a different agenda. And that agenda at that moment is to break those hormones down. You've already produced the hormones you need for ovulation. Now let's actually make them usable to your cells. So the 2 body parts that help break down hormones are the gut and the liver. So that's an amazing time to get off alcohol. It's amazing time, like we talked about, to do the bitter foods. It's amazing time to do as many leafy green vegetables as you possibly can. Like, let's feed your microbiome so you can break those hormones down during that ovulation window. And fasting wise, shorter fasts, you know, it's not, you can fast during that time, but food is your tool during that time. So fasting's the tool the first 10 days. Food is more of a tool for those 5 days. Then you come back out of ovulation and you've got this 4-day period where the hormones are low again, and we're trying to get rid of some of the hormones that your body's already made. Okay, during that time, now we can go back into more fasts. We can go more into some more repair. If people who want to drop weight can go into some of the, if you want to go into a 24-hour fast to repair your gut more, that would be a good time. And then day 20, you don't fast. You stop. At all. And that's when you shut down fasting and you start to bring up glucose, and you go into squashes and sweet potatoes and chocolate, 70-80% chocolate, and you go into more starchy foods, and tropical fruits are great for progesterone. So you're actually purposely trying to bring glucose back up. And then you start your period, and now you go back into fasting again. So if you look at it, it's like the first 10 days, we can use fasting as an incredible tool. And then we have those middle 5 days, we can use food as an incredible tool. And then we have another strange little 4 or 5 day period. We can go back to fasting as our tool. And then we have the 7 days before our period, we can now go into food as our tool.
Wow. And using that, you've seen people get healthier and lose weight?
People are losing weight when they've never been able to lose weight before. We have 70 and 80-year-olds that told us that they accumulated all this menopausal weight. And now we put in there a 30-day fasting reset, and they following the trend that I just talked about. So they're not mapping it obviously to their cycle, but they're doing larger fasts, more food, larger fasts, more food. And they're dropping their menopausal weight. We had an 82-year-old woman the other day say that she's dropped 20 pounds.
Wow.
That she accumulated through menopause just by doing that. So, and then what we're seeing are the 20 and 30-year-olds. We talked about this. The 20 and 30-year-olds are hormonally struggling so deeply. So many of them have lost their cycle. So what we're seeing is when they go into this, okay, I'm going to fast and I'm going to eat. I'm going to fast, I'm going to eat pattern, their cycles are coming back. And perimenopausal women, menopausal women that are like ready to kill somebody, all of a sudden everything gets equalized because they're coming back into a hormonal rhythm, using food and fasting as a tool to bring them back into a hormonal rhythm.
God, that's so powerful. I actually wrote down a list of things because what you're saying, I think, impacts the 20-year-old and, to your point, the 80-year-old.
Yeah.
And I just wrote down a couple of almost weight loss myths that I think that we've been led really astray.
Yeah.
Where it's well, you just keep running on a treadmill and you lose weight.
Yeah. Well, okay, so on that one, so if we go back to estrogen's okay if you do that, go ahead, run on a treadmill and she'll be happy. Progesterone's no. You're running on a treadmill, cortisol is going up for a half hour. I'm not going to make an appearance. So guess what? I'm going to make you crave more carbs because I need you to give me more glucose so I can make my appearance because you just went and raised cortisol on a treadmill for 45 minutes. And now I'm mad. And so I'm going to make you give me more carbs because you didn't honor progesterone.
So definitely do not do that during your progesterone phase. Yeah. I love that. Skinny means that you're healthy.
Oh, okay. I have a theory on this, and it came from an idea or a picture I saw at the Olympic Museum in Lake Geneva. It was the gold medalists in every single sport that's in the Olympics, and they were all dressed in the same outfit. And to see the different body types of the women from all these different sports, like the shot putter was really big and the marathoner was really thin. And to see that women have different body types, but these are Olympic gold medalist athletes that are healthy and performing at their best. So is it possible we weren't all meant to be a size 2?
I think it's safe to say yes.
I think it's, so why if I'm a size 12, am I trying to be a size 2? The better question to ask is, do you love living in your body? Do you love the size you are? And are your blood markers, your metabolic markers like hemoglobin A1C, proving that you are metabolically healthy? If those two things are lining up, you love your body, and your hemoglobin A1C is under 5, and your fasting glucose is between 70 and 90, and your hormones are all balanced in a good place, I don't care what the scale says. I don't care what size pant you're wearing. I want you to be healthy. Skinny isn't always healthy. And I think that women have different body sizes we're supposed to be. And there's a healthy within each one of those body sizes.
I freaking love that, gal. It's so good. Less calories means you lose weight.
Oh, so Jason Fung, he wrote a great book called The Obesity Code. He helped us see that weight loss was a hormonal issue. Here's what happens when you go on a calorie restriction diet. Let's say you eat 1,500 calories a day and you exercise, your output is 500 calories. That's a delta of 1,000 calories. If your delta was 3,000 calories and all of a sudden you brought it down, you ate less, you exercised more, and you brought your set point down to 1,000 calories. The first time you go from a set point of 3,000 calories to 1,000 calories, you're like, my diet and workout is working for me. Mm-hmm. You're like, I'm a rock star. And then all of a sudden you start to eat more calories and you work out a little less. And all of a sudden your set point goes back up to 2,000 or 3,000 calories and you're gaining weight and you're like, but wait, it didn't work. It didn't stick. So calorie counting always changes our set point, and you're going to have to stay at that you're going to have to keep putting out the number of calories and keep the input at the same amount to stay the same weight. Mm-hmm. But that's not living life. Because sometimes you can't work out.
No.
And sometimes you're at an amazing restaurant and you want to eat more calories. So it is a roller coaster ride that will never lead you where you want to go. Temporarily, it might work because it changed your set point temporarily. But once that set point's changed, you're now screwed because you're going to have to stay with that same rigid mentality or you're going to gain weight.
Yeah, this is so profound and important. Because when I was trying to stay as skinny as possible, I was stepping on the scale every single day. I was to the point where I'd take my knickers off just in case the knickers weighed anything, and So I was weighing myself, counting the calories, running on the treadmill like a freaking fiend. And to your point, I was reducing my calories and it was great at first. And then all of a sudden, I was like, I would eat something tiny little bit extra and I was putting on weight. And it was because I'd reduced my calories so much, like I was trying to get under 1,000 calories. That's how bad it got. Then my gut issues happened. I obviously saw the light and I was like, I will never do that again. I'm going to trash the scale. I'm never going to run on a treadmill again. And I'm just going to eat what my body tells me to eat. I look better now than I did when I was calorie counting. And I don't even know how many calories I eat now. I don't count.
That's right.
Am I still hungry? Cool. What else can I eat? Oh, I'm, peckish. I'm going to have something.
Yeah.
And it was that transition that I was like, what is the messaging out there that I believed that calories in, and calories out, like I had to just like monitor everything.
Yeah.
And so again, just the work that you're doing is so profound. And I love that you're just shedding light on so many of these things, because I really wish I had you, Mindy, in my life when I was, 16 and I started to have a very unhealthy relationship with food. So no matter where someone is, where they're listening to this interview, don't beat yourself up. Like I don't beat myself up what happened, but now I know better.
Yeah. Be curious. I love the word curious. I've become obsessed with this word because thank you for continuing to talk about how we beat ourselves up, because this is what we've got to get across. Your example with the calorie is the perfect example of what every woman is doing. We all of a sudden got a result with our calorie counting. We all of a sudden were human and decided we wanted to eat a little bit more. After that, saw that we gained weight, and so we start beating ourselves up, and then we double down and we have to try harder. And so we try harder, we work out more, we exercise more, we diet more, and we try everything more, raising cortisol, causing progesterone to go low. And now progesterone, now you've lost your period. Now we can't get pregnant. Like we have all these consequences of that. And then we're like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why does my period not here? Why can't I get pregnant? What's going on? And we keep internalizing, raising cortisol up, just because somebody somewhere decided that the calorie in, calorie out diet was what we were supposed to follow. Like the consequence is huge.
As we get older as women, we have you've mentioned menopause and perimenopause and things like that. What is happening to our body that men don't experience? Because I've heard you say a stat that 70% of divorces over the age of 40 are actually initiated by women.
Yeah.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
So after 40, a very specific estrogen is going down, and it's called estradiol. And I call estradiol a diva. I'm like, she is like a diva that should have like a 10-year retirement party. Like, here she was. She made serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and BDNF and acetylcholine. She made you think straight. She made you beautiful. She gave you so much wisdom. And now she's going away. She's going to have a 10-year exit. Let's give her a round of applause. Yay, estradiol. Thank you very much. Like, that's what I feel like she needs. She deserves to get. Yeah. She's that powerful. But what does that mean for the woman who's 50 or 52 that's like, yeah, she just left me.
Yeah, this bitch.
Bitch just left me. She went away and left me, and I can't think, and I can't hold on to information, and I can't do the same workload that I used to be able to do. And my husband, oh my God, I used to love him, and now I think I'm going to leave him. Like, so many things change when the diva goes away. And because we don't understand what a diva she was, we don't understand all the things she did for us, and we don't understand our brains when she goes away, we start trying to figure life out from a new hormonal lens. And sometimes we decide we need to leave our marriages. And sometimes we leave life. The most common time for a woman to commit suicide is from 45 to 55. And I strongly feel that that is because women do not understand what that estradiol is on the exit, as is progesterone. We can chat about her exit too. But these two major hormones are exiting, and so therefore your brain is operating differently.
So what was it doing before she starts to exit? And then why is exiting leaving us feeling like we want to end our life or our marriage?
Yeah, so let's just use estradiol for example. When she came in, she gave you serotonin and dopamine, so you were happy and motivated. She also gave you oxytocin, so you felt more connected to people. She also gave you acetylcholine so that you could hold on to information and you could learn new information. She also gave you BDNF so that you had your neuroplasticity of your brain. You could constantly go into new environments and made you very flexible. And then progesterone gave you GABA to calm you. So I call it your neurochemical armor. You had this beautiful neurochemical armor that was there supporting you through the trials and tribulations of life. And now that armor's gone away. And so now that the armor is gone, a lot of unresolved trauma might show up. Like all of a sudden you might need to work with some unresolved trauma. You might notice that the things that didn't stress you out before now really stress you out. You might not be able to work a 10-hour, 12-hour work week. And whereas, at 35, you could put in 15 hours and at 45, you can only put in 8 and you're really struggling. It might mean you're sitting in a boardroom with a bunch of men at the board, at the CEO table, the C-suite table, and all of a sudden you're talking and you forget what you were going to say. And you're like, and so the brain gets harder. And because of that, that causes some women to kill themselves. Because we're not having this discussion. Right? This is why I'm like, if we stop the cultural hush and we let women understand what was going on in their brains and had this discussion, now collectively we can come together with an answer and we could understand ourselves. So when that woman is like, I think I have to leave my husband. I don't feel appreciated at my job. I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm not happy anymore. We think it's all life circumstance. And it would be easy to take yourself out, or easier, I should say. But what if we took that same woman and we said, listen, everything shifted. And so let's work on your lifestyle. Let's talk about how we can bring back some of these age-appropriate hormones. Let's talk about what you can do, like fasting. Fasting creates ketones, and ketones will upregulate BDNF, so now you can think straight. Fasting is going to increase serotonin, so now you're going to be a little bit happier. Exercise. When you lift weights, oh my God, all of a sudden now you're breaking down muscle. That goes up into your brain and creates more neuroplasticity so you can hold on to information more. What about breath work? Breath work, you could stimulate GABA to be able to calm yourself using breath work. Here's your toolbox now. We just needed to give you a bigger toolbox after 40. And because we're not having the conversation, we don't understand ourselves, and the toolbox looks like medication, divorce, irritability, I guess, could be in the toolbox, and unfortunately, perhaps exiting.
And being shunned, I think, from the outside, the outside world, where older women get more dismissed.
Yeah. Oh, and then there's that. And I'm wrinkling, so I'm not as attractive. What about the moms that raised children? They gave their whole life to the family, and now they're 48 and menopausal, and they're going back into the workforce. Of course, neurochemically, you're different. So this is why conversations like this, to me, are life-saving. And when people take this conversation and they take it to the ladies' nights and they take it to the boardroom and they share podcasts like this out, now we start literally saving lives just by a conversation. Mm-hmm. I was in Europe a couple weeks ago and I spoke at Amazon UK, and they have a support group for menopausal women there. And the woman who leads the support group, when I got there, I was like, you're my hero. Like, I can't believe you're at a major corporation creating a support group for menopausal women. Thank you. And she said, well, do you know that we're finding that more women are leaving the workplace in their late 40s than any other time of life? So when you have, thousands of employees that are women in their late 40s, if we don't come up with some solution to help these menopausal women, they're going to leave the workforce. And she's like, do you know how much money that costs a corporation? So I was able to get a support group started here with showing them the profit that they were losing by losing employees. That's how intertwined this conversation is. Right? Are you seeing it?
I'm literally speechless. I'm like processing everything you just said to me. Wow.
And so one of the books that's out right now called The Menopause Reset, I talk about 5 lifestyle changes that women should make after 40. And real quickly, they're learn how to fast to your or to your hormones and vary your fasts, vary your foods, support your microbiome, work on detoxing, and work on the rushing woman. Learning how to
explain what the rushing woman is.
So the rushing woman was not. I always give Dr. Libby Weaver credit for it. She wrote a book called Rushing Woman Syndrome, but it's that go 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 mentality that is causing us to hormonally crash during the perimenopause and menopausal years. So it's almost like everything we've talked about, your work ethic should shift. Like we have to understand that our pace of life needs to shift after 40. That's the rushing woman to me. So we do those 5 things. Okay, now we have a good foundational lifestyle tool for women over 40 to navigate the loss of these hormones because it takes 10 years for them to go away. So this isn't like an overnight switch. Okay, so we have those 5 things in place. Okay, now what do we do with the woman who says, I have everything. I drive a fancy car. I live in a fancy house. I love my kids. I have a supportive husband. I don't have a lot of joy. I'm not happy. Okay, that's serotonin. Estradiol stimulated the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor site. And now estradiol is going away. You're not getting that stimulation of that receptor site. So what are we going to do? Okay, well, we know a ketone can stimulate it. We have some, not to get too controversial, but we have some very interesting research coming out that microdosing psilocybin actually goes into that 5-HT2A receptor site. So we have a natural substance that might be able to go into there. We have information that when we start to prioritize sleep, that we actually can make more serotonin when we're prioritizing sleep. We have some breath work. So we can pull in other tools knowing that joy is going away because estradiol went away. So we just pull other tools in. What about neuroplasticity? We can't hold on to information. We can't learn information. A lot of women pick up books. They're like, I just can't read and hold on to that information. Okay, well, are you putting yourself in new environments? Like, as we age, we drive the same direction to the store. We go to the same store. We hang out with the same people. We go to our favorite restaurant. We wear our favorite clothes. We do the same thing over and over again. That is the worst thing you can do after 40. After 40, the best thing you can do is put yourself in as many new environments as possible to force your brain to start to create new neuronal pathways. When I was in travel, when I was in Europe, it takes a moment to even figure out how to turn on the light and which plug you need. And like all I kept thinking one day when I couldn't figure out how to turn the lights on in my hotel room was like, oh, the neuroplasticity that's happening to my 50 or 4-year-old brain right now is huge.
What I love, before you go any further, what I love is most of us would beat ourselves up since, I'm just getting old.
Yeah,
Look how terrible am I?
That's
I'm
right.
losing it. But I love that you immediately went to the positive.
Yes.
That's so good.
Yeah, because put yourself in difficult situations so you force new neuronal pathways. So again, there's a different toolbox, and because what we're doing right now is we're like, oh God, think of the water cooler conversation. It's like, God, she's a bitch. My God, did you see Susie? Yeah, I think she's hormonal. Oh my God, what a bitch. Like, that's not let's whisper about it. Let's not talk about it. Men, even when I bring this up to men go, well, you said it. Thank God you can say it. Let's just bring it out in the open. Yes, my brain is changing. I'm 54 years old and I lost the diva that helped my brain work right. She's gone. I need some new tools, please. And don't just try to slap a hormone replacement patch on me, that's an okay, but I still am not supposed to, at 55, I'm not supposed to have the same hormones I had at 25. The diva's still going away.
It's so empowering. This is so empowering.
Right.
Because when I even think about identity, the identity we have about ourselves, right, that we remember when we were 20, we remember in our 30, and it's like, oh God, my identity is the person that crushes it. And now here I can't even hold thought in my head.
Yep.
So that, like, you want to talk about confidence, freaking plummets.
Yep.
And then the identity other people have of us. So if you're in a relationship, and let's say take even different stages, if you've been in a marriage, so I've been married for 21 years, going into, so now I'm 44. So my husband's going to see that change.
That's right.
And so I am going to be potentially a different type of wife, that
Yeah.
I'm not going to show up the same way that I did when I was 24 years old. So knowing that, talking to my spouse about it, letting them know what's going to happen so that they understand my change as much as I do. And now whatever I thought of myself as showing up as a wife before is going to change, and now he can embrace it too, or she. And then thinking about the, just the identity that other people have of you. It's like, oh, she used to be so sharp, right?
Yeah.
And now you're like, oh God, especially if you're working. Like when you said that about Amazon, it's like, oh, it totally hit me, of course, because maybe women can't show up the same way.
That's right.
And now they feel badly, so then they just bail out instead of go, what support system can I do as I evolve? Doesn't mean that I'm worse, I'm just different.
Got it. That's it. You just summed it all up. That is exactly it. And until we bring it out into the light, we cannot heal women. We can't help women until women see that. And what we will continue to do is turn on ourselves. We will continue to beat ourselves up, and we will continue to leave marriages. And I'm not trying to keep everybody married, and I'm not trying to keep everybody employed. We'll continue to leave corporate, but I'm asking people to understand us. Please, can we just have this conversation so that we can start to heal? Because we can't heal until society has this conversation. And then we can say, God, I'm sorry, give me a moment, my estradiol's gone. I know you just asked me a question. Ask me the question again, because I just forgot it.
Amen, sister.
Right?
I literally, I could talk to you for so long. Like, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Guys, I really hope that this episode, just share this. Where can people find you? Where can people find the book? And just all the incredible content you're doing.
You can go to, Amazon. You can buy it anywhere that books are sold. I will give a shout out for the indies. I am such a fan of the small bookstores. So if you have the opportunity to go to your local bookstore, there's you can find Fast Like a Girl there. YouTube's my passion project. So all this stuff, you want to know about belly fat, go to YouTube. We got a lot on YouTube where I teach all of this in chunk down ways. And if you forget all that, just go to drmindipelz.com.
If you want to learn the insane anti-aging benefits of fasting for women, then keep watching.
Number one is you stop snacking. Rip the Band-Aid off, because that will force you to reallocate your macros. So macros are protein, fat, and carbs. And in order to go 4 to 5 hours between a meal, you have to stop snacking. You're going to have more protein, less carbohydrates, and certainly the quality of carbs are important. Healthy fats if needed. So if you're having a ribeye, you don't need to add more fats. And understanding that you are going to be okay going 4 to 5 hours in between. So that's a starting point. No snacking. Start adjusting those macros. And I think most of us are grossly under eating protein. I find most women are eating 40 to 50 a day total, really aiming for 100 grams a day. So it may take a bit of time to go from 40 to 50 to 100, but aiming for more protein, because protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It's super important, especially for women north of 35. To maintain your muscle mass, you have to hit enough protein. I always say, looking at a pound is 16 ounces. So 8 ounces of steak, 8 ounces of chicken, that's going to get you closer to that metric. Cool. If you want to track your macros, Chronometer is a great app. It's free. I have no affiliation with them, but that's a great option because it breaks down micronutrients as well as macros. So if you want to get nerdy and know how much potassium and sodium are in things, that's a good way to go. So really understanding that, it'll take a bit of time. Like an egg is 6 grams of protein. So what do you want your omelet to be? You want your omelet to be 3 to 4 at least, at least, so that you're getting a decent amount of protein bolus with each meal. And then kind of transitioning to, when I talk about carbs, I'm not anti-carb. If you're metabolically healthy, insulin sensitive, not insulin resistant, then carbohydrates are less of an issue for you. But given most Americans, there was a 2018 UNC Chapel Hill study that it was 88.2% of Americans at that time, pre-pandemic, we're not metabolically healthy.
88.2?
Yeah. Yeah. So important for people to understand context. If you are overweight, obese, insulin resistant, you have to curtail your carbs. And that means getting carbs from whole food sources, berries, non-leafy, non-starchy vegetables. If you're getting it from like sweet potato and root vegetables, that's very different than getting it from bread and pasta and rice. And it's important for people to understand I'm not anti-carb, but like, let's get real. We have to be honest with ourselves and examine our relationship with carbohydrates. And then again, the fats, depending on what is in the protein. So ribeye, you don't need more fats. Have a piece of salmon, you don't need more fats. It's not 5 avocados a day. That's where people get in trouble. Avocados are delicious, but you don't want to be eating copious amounts of them. And then the next lever is really looking at not eating from dinner to breakfast. Now, people freak out. They're like, that means no snacking after dinner. That means no alcohol. That means no sweets. Yes, you can do it. You go from dinner to breakfast, because for many people, they are unknowingly fasting 13 or 14 hours all on their own. And so that's the next kind of hurdle to get over. And that's the stepwise progression that I found. And it may take people going from snacking, it may take them weeks to go to getting comfortable with allocating how much protein they need on their plate before they even consider going from dinner to breakfast. But that's a pretty good stepwise approach that people can utilize that can help them kind of think about, okay, once I master not snacking, then the next thing is this, then the next thing is this.
What's the biggest thing that people have with the mastering of not snacking? Because I can also see a world where people just like, but I'm starving. So how do you take people through in that moment where they're like, all right, I've just listened to this episode, but goddamn, my tummy's telling me if I just have this, I'll feel better. In fact, this is exactly what happened with me and my husband. He wanted to cut out sugar. And so he told me, babe, I really want to show up. I've read all this stuff about, cognitive behavior. And so, I really do want 6-pack abs, right? He was just honest. He's like, I want 6-pack abs and I want to have mental clarity. So I'm going to cut out sugar. And I was like, great. 3 days in, he's literally like, I'm just going to grab a cookie. And I was like, but babe, I was trying to like support him, right? And he's like, as if I was food shaming him. He was like, but I know if I have this cookie, my headache will go away. You want me to stay with the headache? Right now, this was definitely back when we first met, before he had the growth mindset. But that's the thing that I can assume people are going to say. I have a headache, who can snack, I'm starving, I can't concentrate. And what I would love is for you to say a few things maybe that when they're in that moment to recognize it's just temporary.
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's also part of what I encourage patients to think about is, what did you eat at your last meal? Because it's reinforcing you didn't eat enough protein probably because you shouldn't be hungry. It's also checking in like, are you stressed? Where are you in your menstrual cycle? Are you feeling sad? Like, are you looking for that snack? Because you're not really hungry. It's more of like an emotional need that you're trying to meet. And the other thing is, if you're really that hungry, then say, okay, today I only ate 6 ounces of protein. So in my next meal, I'm going to eat more. And right now I'm going to have a piece of beef jerky. Maybe I have a piece of cheese. Maybe I have a piece of fruit with that. And I'm going to just give myself that snack. But it's with the understanding that it's information. You're getting information. What are you going to do with the information? And so I think that's important, like that realization to put those things together to say, okay, what am I going to do differently next time?
And is that why, because the next question I was going to ask, but I think you just answered it, is some people may hear something and be like, okay, if I can't snack after my dinner, I'm just going to have my snack for my dinner.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't recommend that because, if you're feeling like, one thing that's important to really emphasize is that fasting is not designed to make you miserable. So if you are miserable, we need to examine what's going on. So for some people, and this is not pejorative, it's just like after working with thousands and thousands of people, we eat for different reasons. Sometimes we eat for hunger, like true intrinsic physical hunger. Sometimes we eat because we don't want to deal with feelings. And being able to differentiate, I think, is very important because I'm no different than anyone else. Like if I'm stressed, I'm going to be thinking about that dark chocolate. I'm like, dang, I need my dark chocolate. That's like my one vice. I'm like, I want my dark chocolate, but I have to examine, do I really want the chocolate? Or is it because I don't want to deal with the fact that I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed because I've got this deadline looming, I have slides I have to get done, I've got this trip coming up, or I just had an argument with my teenagers, which lately seems to happen more often than not. So it's really examining like what's going on deep down to mitigate that desire. And there's nothing wrong with deciding that you want to allocate a time during your week where you want to have dessert, or you want to have a glass of wine, or you want to have something savory. That is totally okay. Fasting is designed to be flexible, But as you are kind of transitioning into a fasting lifestyle, understanding you're going to have a day, well, you can have a day where you're like, I don't want to fast today. And that is okay. It's not about rigidity. And I think that's very important because I think people can be rigidly dogmatic, and that is detracting attention from the higher purpose. Like, why are we fasting? Like, really, what's your why? Like, reflecting back on that when you're having, having a day where I want that cookie. Like, what's going on for you? Really kind of stepping into what is going on internally that is mitigating that behavior and examining that. Like, I'm very much of the belief system of, actions and feelings, like they can come together, but it's understanding that interrelationship. Like, what else is going on that's mitigating this desire to do something that's outside my norm?
I love having the why. That's a genius idea. And you also talk about making sure that you have your why and then putting a schedule together. Talk to me about that and why it's important, and then how we actually start to do that.
Well, I think when we're having our why, I think irrespective of whether it's fasting, whether you have a new lifestyle change, whether you're making a huge lifestyle change, like something substantive, a move, a divorce, etc., being very clear about the area of focus. Like for me personally, I'll just give myself as an example. I always say my purpose is very clear. Like ultimately, my highest priority is my family, and that is in my nuclear family. So my husband and my boys, like that is always the purpose. However, I always think about decisions in terms of, does this meet my higher purpose? Like, is this feeding an ego? Is this feeding, like, am I meeting, like, am I doing the things within my business that are pushing me forward to make sure I can help provide for my higher purpose or contribute to the higher purpose, but not detract from that? And so when it comes to lifestyle changes, I think about it very similarly. If your why is, my mother had diabetes, my father had diabetes, I want to ensure I never develop diabetes, and fasting is but one tool that is going to help move me closer to not having diabetes, then you have to think about that. And I always say to patients, write it down. I don't care if you keep it in your phone, you keep it on your desk, you write it on your computer, and you put it on a Post-it note. However it is, you need that visual representation of what your why is, because you're going to have, it's human nature. We're going to have times where we are going to struggle. We're going to have times when it's hard to persevere. You're going to have times, that is human nature. We are not robots. We would like to believe we are, but we are not. And so when we're working towards the why, it's always something that's tangible, attainable, and something that you can reflect on to help reinforce good habits.
It's so beautiful, thinking through, for me, the mission of impacting women. And if I'm not cognitively clear, if I can't show up for interviews, if I don't have that, the energy to do it, then I'm not in line with my mission. And so that becomes like my why of my mission, and my life really does then become the why of why I need to make sure that I'm taking care of my health. That intermittent fasting is definitely something that's really helped me, so that any time that I feel like, who cares, right? Like, we all get lazy, like you even said. It's like, okay, I give myself grace on that day, but then I remind myself the next day, and I absolutely am able to get back because the why is so damn strong. I absolutely freaking love that.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think too frequently we as women, and I'm a reformed people pleaser. And actually, I was on a podcast earlier today, and the podcast host said, what do you think that stemmed from? And I was like, ooh, that's a good question. And I think we as women, we're conditioned to serve everyone else's needs in many ways, whether that's cultural, whether that's expectations set up by family or choices that we make. And so I encourage women to articulate what their needs are. Are your needs being met? So I see so many women that by the time they're 40 years old, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I haven't been taking care of me for my whole lifetime. And they feel guilty. They feel bad. And I'm like, no. Getting up early to go to the gym, whether that's what you choose to do, or you're eating less frequently, or maybe your feeding window ends earlier than when your kids eat. Like, I have teenagers, they eat later than I do. I sit down with them, but they understand, like, mom eats by X number, I eat by 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock at night. I can't eat at 9, then my sleep's messed up. So really understanding how that all kind of interplays with one another.
And do you find that because the benefits are so good for you, you have the confidence to tell people that? Because as you're talking, I was like, I'm the same now. It doesn't matter who asks me. If they ask me out for dinner at 7, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to eat, or we can eat at 5. It's like I give them the option.
once upon a time, I would have absolutely been insecure to tell people. I would have just said yes. I would have dealt with the stomach issues. I would have eaten at 10 p.m. because I was a people pleaser, because I didn't want to be fussy, because I didn't want to, like, you know, rattle the cage of the situation or dinner. If, like, 5 people said yes, and then here I am. And so there's a lot of confidence that comes with telling the people around you, hey, I'm fasting. This is what, you know, and so it, you know, I'm not going to be able to eat dinner with you. Do you think that that comes from really feeling the benefits first and then being able to then say it?
Definitely. And I think the gift, if we want to call it a gift of the pandemic, was that I had a whole year with my nuclear family and it was just us. And I said to my husband, you know, kids going, you know, they're in school virtually, we're home all the time. And I just said, I finally realized, like, my body does best when I close my feeding window earlier. And I'm no longer going to apologize. Like, my family members that make fun of me, they're like, you're like an elderly person. You know, you want to go to dinner at 5 o'clock. And I said, you know what? I feel better. I feel better and I'm doing what's best for me. Like, on occasion when we have family events and I have to suck it up, I will do that, but I'll eat a really small meal. I'll do it to be present, but they know, like, I don't drink alcohol. I'm not going to eat the, you know, junky dessert. I'm not going to eat a big bolus of food at 9 o'clock at night because my sleep is too important. And so I think on a lot of levels, yes, I'm very confident, but I also explain to people, this is what works for me. In the context of what works for you, if it overlaps, that's great. If not, I will come and I'd love to have you, you know, if you want to eat dinner and you want to have a glass of wine, I will sit with you and I will enjoy talking to you, but I'm not going to compromise what works best for me in terms of my health based on, you know, late night dining or based on an evening of drinking too much alcohol. Or I always say, like, dark chocolate's my one big vice that I love. But it's like, even then, it's like, you know, sometimes I have to say to myself, is this serving my higher purpose? Is it going to keep me up later? Because I'm sensitive to caffeine, but it's all good.
And I find that finding people that do want to do that as well, like eat earlier. So when as we're talking about, you know, intermittent fasting, you mentioned Gabrielle Lyon before, like, she's a good homie of mine, and we were all trying to arrange to go out for dinner with her and Roxy and Eve Torres, and we're all the same. And so literally I'm like, well, guys, can we make 5? And they're like, oh yeah, well, we don't want to do later. And so all of a sudden, all of us are like, well, it can't do later. So if we can't make this date work at 5 o'clock, we'll move the entire date. And so finding people that you can be around to encourage you and help you, because once you start to feel those health benefits, having other people help you continue is going to be super important.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, there's shame within their family and friend circle about whether it's dietary choices, things they eliminate, whether it's fasting, whether it's not drinking or eating certain things. And so I've just come to I'm like Teflon. I'm like, I don't care what my family members think. I mean, I care what my kids and my husband think, but beyond that, I'm like, I'm the weird aunt, or I'm the weird, I mean, it's like the labeling, and I'm like, that's your pejorative statement. Like, if you came to me and said, I need to eat by 5 o'clock, I'd be like, fine.
Yeah.
That's, you know, but I agree with you. It's important to be surrounded by people that are like-minded.
Saying to people that you're fasting or intermittent fasting or long-term fasting, like, I remember when my husband first told me, like, oh, I'm just not going to eat for 5 days. He triggered me. So I grew up with a mum that was borderline anorexic, and so I've had a bad relationship with food growing up, which is why I ended up taking antibiotics, because I was getting sick a lot, because I was cutting out fat. It's a whole thing, right? So I end up having all these issues. And so as I start to get back on track of getting my health back, I realized I'd done it to myself because I had a poor relationship with food. I don't beat myself up, but I acknowledge it. And so my husband comes home and he's like, oh my God, yeah, this doctor said, and I'm going to do the 5 day. And I was like, but that's starving yourself. And what I didn't realize is, he triggered me. And so how do you talk about when people either get triggered by it, how do we navigate that? Because going back to just the amount of beautiful benefits that fasting can have on somebody, if they're getting triggered, then we've missed an opportunity for them to actually potentially adopt it and see if it works for them.
Oh yeah, my easiest way of addressing that is to eat less often, because that's benign. People are like, oh, I can do that, eat less often. And it's determining, what does that look like in your life? What does that show up as in your life? And so I always acknowledge when people get triggered if I say something, and I definitely go about ensuring that I communicate in a very thoughtful way, thoughtful, sensitive way. I just acknowledge, okay, that might be an area of work that someone needs to go on. But certainly I have a coach in one of my programs who healed her disordered relationship with food by fasting. And so I'll have women that will come after me and they're like, your content is triggering, you're potentiating eating disorders. And I'm like, whoa, time out, wait a second. No, you're mirroring your own, concerns on me. That has nothing to do with the messaging. So I do think that we oftentimes, if we feel triggered by something, it's inner work that, it's almost like a wound, like it's a trauma that we have to kind of work on. I do find for a lot of people, it's really examining like, what is it about fasting or about that word that is bothersome for you? If saying eating less often is more comfortable, then just use that phrase. I mean, that's usually how I define it. I'm like, that's really what we're speaking to. Sometimes people hear the word fast and they think that means starvation. So I have to differentiate, like very different. And even looking at the research, like starvation is very different than fasting, whether it's prolonged or intermittent. So I think on a lot of different levels, if people can view it as eating less often, it becomes a little less offensive.
Do you mind breaking down then how you see the difference between starving and fasting?
Starving is not eating. Intermittent fasting is choosing to eat within a specific time frame or choosing not to eat between a specific time frame. To me, it is much more deliberate. I've certainly had plenty of girlfriends who were anorexic, and that is very, very different. I always tell people, I still eat. I just don't eat between, let's arbitrarily say, I don't eat between 6 and 9 o'clock in the morning. So there's always that 15-hour span of time when I choose not to eat. Could I eat? Sure.
So you have the same amount of food, you just reduce the time that you have it in, versus anorexia or starvation, where they eliminate the calories basically altogether and they try and reduce as much as possible.
Yeah, so they just don't eat at all. And it's interesting, during my training, my psych rotation was at an eating disorder hospital that was in the Baltimore area. And it gave me very much a bird's eye view of what is really going on, emotionally, intellectually for a lot of these women. And so for me, that's always stayed with me. Like, I'm probably very conscientious about just being sensitive to that. I'm like, that is a real entity. If you are choosing not to eat, that is a real issue, versus intermittent fasting. It's a choice. Now, do I see people on social media that I suspect have an eating disorder and they hide their eating disorder in intermittent fasting? Yes, I see plenty of that.
So how do we start to break apart whether we're really doing it because, oh my God, we see the benefits and it's really making me feel better, or I can actually now get away with it without having to say that I've got an eating disorder? And the reason why I ask is because I don't know if some people are even aware of it. Because even going to myself, I've got an addictive personality. I know that about myself. So just when I started to do the fasting, I had a fasting app, and I was like, oh, I did 16 today. Let's go 17 tomorrow. Yeah. I did 17. Let's go 18. Yeah. And what I realized was I stopped listening to my body. I started to just play the game of the numbers and then challenge myself, because I do find pleasure in the challenge. But I have just been sick for 7 years and seen where that got me, and then immediately identified. I was like, uh-oh, I'm now spilling into this becoming unhealthy. And as soon as I go from this was helping me to, this is now becoming almost it's detrimental to my mindset, then I now know that borderline. But I don't think some people, if you haven't been through that, are necessarily aware that they're doing it out of a bad relationship with food versus a healthy relationship with your body.
Yeah, I think it's a sticky wicket. Like, let's be honest and very transparent. I think there are people who are susceptible to orthorexia. Like, not only are they fasting, but then they're paranoid about eating anything, quote unquote, however they deem it to be unhealthy. They won't eat in a restaurant. They stress about everything. I think people, if you suspect you might have a disordered relationship with food, then you probably do. And that's okay. I mean, half the battle is acknowledging the behavior in order to work through it. And as I mentioned, I do have a coach on my team who healed her disordered relationship with food through fasting. But I think she's probably someone that's much more self-aware. So I typically will say to people, I think it's very important to work with a therapist or a clinical psychologist that is well-versed in eating disordered behavior, so that you can both come together and determine if you are in a position to actually successfully, healthfully fast. That's usually my go-to mechanism. Like, I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm not an eating disorder specialist, but I've certainly seen a lot of eating disordered behavior over 25 years of working with patients. And so for me, it's always like, if you think you might, you probably do. Because I talk to so many women and I'll say to them, do you feel like fasting for you is triggering your binge eating?
Right, that was going to be my next
Yeah.
thing, is like, how do you work with the binge eating? Because that's what people...
Yeah, and it's interesting. So again, I think it really goes back to, working with a therapist or someone who's knowledgeable in this space so they can help kind of set up strategies to help support them. But I always say, like, did you fast too long? Did you fast? Did you not eat the right foods when you broke your fast? Because if people say to me, I fasted for 13 hours and I ate like 5 Big Macs and 5 fries, I'm like, okay, that's different than someone who fasts for 14 or 15 hours and then sits down and, they eat chicken and then they have some soup and then they have some bread. And next thing they've had like, 3 meals worth of food. And I'm like, you need to make sure you're eating enough. If your body perceives that you're not going to give it nourishing food, you get this overriding of the prefrontal cortex. So your amygdala, which is your reptile brain, is like, I'm starving, nothing's coming, and you don't have no executive function because your brain is stressed. That can happen. So it's like there are multiple psychological contributors. But I always say to people, if you're really feeling like every time you break your fast, you're binging, then it's probably not a good strategy for you. And that's okay. Like, let me be very clear. Not every person's going to have success, and that is totally okay. Like, there's no shame in that. But some people have to do things a little differently. Maybe they're like literally 12 hours of digestive rest and they just stop and see how things are going. And then, can they get their protein needs met in that window? And then maybe go 30 minutes longer a couple weeks later and stop and see how they feel. So not everyone who starts fasting is going to rapidly get to 16 hours fasted. Some people it's 4 to 6 weeks. It can take longer, or some people it's just not appropriate given what it triggers in them emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, that's so important to say and to identify. And for me, I did go from, okay, the app, right? So I was like, oh, let me see how much I can do. And then once I realized, okay, it's become unhealthy now, I've crossed that line, let me get rid of the app. And then I just stopped. And it's funny how I always end up coming back to this. It's like, how do you feel? And so I realized, okay, going to bed earlier is literally night and day for me on how I feel with my gut the next day. So that was non-negotiable for me. I've identified that 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. is perfect. I have to stay up for at least 3 hours. And now the next day in the morning, I'm just not going to look at the time. And for about a week, I can't remember how long I did it for, but I was like, you're only going to eat when you say you're hungry. And I'm not going to look at the time. And what I realized was I started to get hungry around 10 o'clock. And so if my last meal is at 5 and I'm starting to eat at 10, I inevitably found my beautiful, perfect fasting window.
And that's perfect. And I think for each one of us, it's examining what works for us. I know for me, if I end at 5 o'clock, by 9 or 10, I am very hungry. And if I've lifted that morning, because I tend to work out fasted, I can tell. And I think if you're metabolically flexible, you can intuitively fast. And that's when I'll say to people, like, don't force yourself to fast 2 more hours just because. If you're hungry, you're really hungry, then eat. And so I think it's important for people to know that one of the things I like to teach about fasting is it's designed to be flexible. So I don't love rigidity of any kind. And I think that's an important distinction. I'm like, rigid dogmatism is a bad thing. And I think it's very important for people to acknowledge, like, where are you in time and space? What life stage are you at? Are you 35 and under? Are you perimenopausal? Are you menopausal? And then understanding each stage requires kind of a different strategy. Some things are similar, but most things are not. And understanding that we should stop apologizing for our physiology. Like, I grew up in the time when we were like, oh, we don't want to talk about our menstrual cycle. We don't want to talk about our period. God forbid I have a tampon. God forbid anyone talks about, any of these things in mixed company. And yet we shouldn't apologize. Our physiology is what makes us unique and beautiful. We shouldn't feel like we have to apologize for it.
Yeah, I find it, like, for instance, weight loss. It's something that I know that you really talk about, and you do a beautiful, delicate job. And I'm trying to find the right words, even in me talking to you about it, because I don't ever want someone to think that they have to lose weight to be validated, to feel good about themselves. Never, ever. But I also don't want to ignore the fact that many people do want to lose weight for their own personal reasons. And so how do we start to talk about losing weight, giving women the tools to be able to do it, healthily, of course, without it being a triggering thing, without it saying that, like, hey, you have to do it or you should be doing it, but really from a, this is why it benefits your health. And if you do this, you're going to be around for a long time.
I think weight loss resistance is a very touchy subject. I had a mom that was, I think, shamed by her father because she was very voluptuous. And I think it triggered things in my grandfather that, he made her weight an issue. And I think my mother spent her entire lifetime being very fixated on her weight. And I think that can be very damaging long term. So I certainly have that experience growing up, and then in talking to thousands and thousands of women. So I think you have to come from a place of sensitivity, understanding who you're talking to, and being very clear. Like, are you in a position where you're 40 years old and you want to weigh the way you did at 18? And I'm like, is that realistic? Because I know I don't weigh what I weighed at 18. I have more muscle on me than I did at that time. But I think people get fixed on the scale. They get fixed on a number, like an arbitrary number. I want to wear X size. Well, why? What is the purpose? Like, let me understand. And oftentimes it's like, oh, that's the size I wore before I got married, or that's the size I wore before I had kids, or that's the size I want to get back to after breastfeeding, or whatever it is. And I'm like, but so let's just talk about or unpack, how does that help you long term? Like, is that extra 10 pounds, like whatever it is, 10 pounds, 20, 30, 40, 50, how is that going to serve you? And I think it's important for us to, talk about, sometimes weight loss is what needs to occur in our heads and not necessarily in our bodies. Sometimes our mindset is really dysfunctional. So I think when I talk to women about their goals, which almost always are weight loss, it's like, okay, let's talk, let's unpack. Like, what are you already doing? If someone says to me, I don't sleep more than 6 hours a night, I can't manage my stress, inflammatory food, standard American diet is a great example of that. Really looking at their relationship with exercise. Are you exercising at all? Because something as simple as taking a walk after a meal is going to help with insulin sensitivity. Something that simple, like we're not even talking about a gym, but are they doing 6 hours a week of chronic cardio? Looking at gut health, we talked about that. Looking at toxins in their environment, personal care products and food. Really looking about, if you look at the research on trauma as one example, women that have had a certain amount of adverse childhood events are more at risk for autoimmune tissue. They're more at risk for weight gain in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. So trauma histories. So really looking at like what's driving what's going on for them. Meal frequency, obviously, if they're eating snacks and mini meals all day long and they're drinking sugary beverages, that is certainly going to contribute. So once I get a sense of where all those things fit in, then I pick the low flying fruit. Okay, let's get you to sleep through the night. Because I can't get you to lose weight until you sleep through the night. And that's based on research. We know that you get issues with dysregulation of blood sugar, leptin, ghrelin, all these hunger and satiety hormones. I always say, like, when I had kids at home that were infants and breastfeeding and I wasn't sleeping well, I didn't crave steak. I craved junk. Like, I craved sugar. I made tons and tons of cookies when I was breastfeeding my kids because I just couldn't get enough food on board. It was a choice. I mean, I think about it now, I'm like, I just wasn't eating the right foods. But I think for a lot of people, starting with low-lying fruit, like, what's your sleep like? Most women don't sleep enough. And so, it could be as simple as you get them sleeping through the night and then they're able to better moderate with their blood sugar, and then you adjust some macros and get them eating differently, and that alone could be the reason. Now, some people they're really weight loss resistant and it's more complicated than that, and you start doing labs, so there's multiple layers. But I think when I'm talking to women about, they bring it up, not me. It always has to be from a place of comfort for them, but being sensitive and just kind of getting a sense of what else are they doing in their lifestyle that could be contributing to why they're not losing weight. And doing it in a thoughtful manner. I always say to my kids, I can say anything to anyone, provided I say it in a thoughtful, respectful manner.
You said something, I didn't want to interrupt you, but why is it that people that have had trauma in their childhood are more likely to have weight issues?
It's interesting because I just recently interviewed Gabor Mate, and I mean, his book was just like blew my mind. And actually Sarah Gottfried, she was on my podcast, and she was the first person that brought it up and said, adverse childhood events greater than 6. So you can actually take this test or assessment online. You are at greater risk for developing autoimmune issues. And so I suspect it's chronic cortisol. So sympathetic dominance, chronic cortisol, cortisol is not a bad hormone. It gets a bad rep. But if you have chronically high cortisol for a long period of time, that's high blood sugar, high insulin, I think it
all
creates
from stress, correct?
Yes. And so I think that it kind of sets things up, but they also have this triggered like response where, you know, something benign happens, but it brings them back to abandonment issues or maybe abuse that they, you know, sustained as a child. And so I think that those people are at greatest risk. And so obviously I don't have a handle on all the research that's been done, but that's kind of my supposition about what's contributing to that. But it's definitely a risk factor. And as I've learned more about trauma myself, I'm like, wow, that makes sense. Like that really makes sense.
Dude, this is like huge right now because, God, when I think about if you've been a child and you've had trauma, like real trauma, and now as you get older, with the weight gain, the potential of your self-esteem then going down, and like to think that it all stems from these things that have happened as a child that we didn't necessarily have the control over is heartbreaking, and maybe at the same time amazing discovery. Because when I think about how we blame ourselves for, you know, like for instance me with my gut, right, I did it to myself. And, you know, people that do, I think, overeat do have that emotional, because I've got people in my life who have told me this, they do have that emotion where it's like they overeat and then they feel badly about themselves because they overeat, and it becomes this cycle.
Vicious cycle.
And so now to be able to say, well, actually, it's this thing that has this trauma or this scar that you've held with you all this time, and it stems from childhood. Just like with psychology, that we can now start to piece apart and distance ourselves, our current selves with our childhood selves. Maybe this is a beautiful discovery that you're making, that now people can do that as well when it comes to weight and how they feel about themselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, when I was interviewing Gabor, like I have had childhood trauma that I've dealt with. I'm in a good place. But he was coaching me as we were recording, and I remember saying, as I was doing my podcast intro after, I said, "This is the most personal podcast you've ever heard from me." Wow. Because he was coaching me, but I think it's important for people to talk about, like in a thoughtful way. Like you don't want to put it all out there, but in a thoughtful way, people need to talk about what they've experienced so they lessen the impact. I think a lot of people have a lot of shame, and shame thrives in secrecy. And so it's important for people to get it out, like in a safe place, whether it's a therapist, a psychologist, your healthcare practitioner, your girlfriend, whoever is, you know, receptive to being that resource person. But it's important to talk about this stuff. There's far too much shame that goes on for women that they don't.
Do you mind sharing what the breakthrough was for you in that interview?
You know, it's interesting. So my father and I have always had like a very tenuous relationship. My parents have been divorced since I was 7. My dad has been an alcoholic my whole life. And so the big thing for me, and I've been in a good place after a lot of therapy with my relationship with my dad, because I suspect my dad's on the Asperger's spectrum, autism spectrum, and you know, he experienced a lot of trauma growing up, and that's where the alcoholism fed in for him. And so, you know, I was saying to Gabor, like, I view him so compassionately now, because I really understand, like, my parents did the very best they could. Like I always say, I didn't get the parents I wanted, I got the parents I needed, because my kids will not have the intergenerational abuse and trauma that I experienced. So I always say it stops with me. But I said the really powerful thing is I just view them with compassion. Like there's no judgment. There's no like, oh, you weren't the father I wanted you to be. I'm like, that tired narrative doesn't get anyone anywhere. It's like, I view you compassionately because you must have gone through a lot to have been an addict your whole life. Like that, and that's sad. But it's also, I view them with compassion. I'm like, you know, it's just a very different way, a very different flow state to be in. It's like, it is what it is. Obviously, my parents made me into the person that I am today, and I'm grateful for that, because I wouldn't be who I am. But I look at it, and Gabor got me talking quite a bit about it. Like, just like, do you understand that your dad must have had profound trauma to have been that much of an alcoholic? And I said, oh, absolutely. I totally get that. But it's like, you just feel like, you're like, gosh, I have boys. I can't imagine one of my children feeling so, you know, traumatized that they spend their entire life having an addiction to a substance that they don't have the ability to stop using.
Thank you for sharing that. And what I think is even more beautiful is you saying that you've got now compassion for your dad because you've identified that trauma. The hope is that now people hopefully maybe have compassion for themselves.
Yes.
if they find themselves in situations where they're unable to, maybe change their lives or show up maybe to do the things that you're laying out. And it's like, instead of beating yourself up and saying, you're no good, you're a loser, you can't even do this, like being able to give yourself that compassion and say, look, it comes from trauma, I think is a massive key, because that identifying piece, at least for me, goes, oh, okay, I won't judge myself now. Yeah. And now that I don't judge myself, it almost then, like I said, separates my emotion from the situation. And now I can come up with almost a game plan. And everything that you've written in the book and everything I feel like we've discussed today now allows me to put the game plan into action. But the moment that you feel lost, the moment that you don't know where to pivot, the moment where you feel like you're trying things, or, you're kind of in this spiral and you don't know where to turn, then just feeds into the fact that you feel worthless, shame, embarrassment.
Yeah, and it's a time to take a pause. Like I jokingly say to my kids, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, lost, it's like, stop. What's the one thing you can do next? That's what you focus on.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I would actually love you break it down in your book in real detail, but if you don't mind us going over, even in that first month, if someone's now wanting to fast, they've done the work, they've listened to what we've said, and they're like, all right, I'm ready. Take us through that 1 month. You really beautifully break out, okay, from day 1 to day 7. If you don't mind doing a couple of those, so that people can know where to start, that would be amazing.
Well, I think the most important thing is to set yourself up for success. So if you've got crap in your pantry, because I encourage everyone to go lower carb. Average Americans consuming 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day. So
what?
Yeah, and that's and a lot of that's related to beverages. So people are drinking they're drinking their calories. So tons and tons of carbohydrates. So I encourage people to go under 100 grams and to start tracking their carbohydrates and tracking their protein. I encourage them, clean out your pantry. Set yourself up for success. If there's your kryptonite in there, it's a chip, a candy, whatever it is, get rid of it. Just get rid of it, because it's not benefiting you. And so that's a good starting point. And then it's the slow progression, going from dinner to breakfast and then slowly opening up that fasting window. So maybe you go from 13 hours to 13 and a half, you go to 14, and then slowly opening up, kind of getting to that 16 hours fasted, which for many people can take, because you're doing all these other things. You're not snacking, you're restructuring your macros, you cleaned out your pantry. Now it's all your vices are gone. And so you're like, okay, how do I manage and mitigate all these changes all at once? And then it's that slow progression. And I always remind people, the more carbohydrate dependent they are, aka insulin resistant, it can take them longer. They could take 4 to 6 weeks to get to a point where their body is effectively able to access stored fat as a fuel source, because that's what allows us to go from, looking at it from, 14 hours to 16 to 18 and doing it without as much pain and anguish. That people say, I'm white knuckling fasting. Okay, you're doing it wrong. Let's back it up. And then the other piece to really consider and think about is, where are you in your menstrual cycle? So if you're at the beginning of your cycle, that's the time you can get away with more fasting, versus, women will text me and they'll say, I don't know, I can barely get to 14 hours. I'm like, where are you in your cycle? And they'll look at their app. They're like, oh, I'm supposed to get my period in 2 days. I'm like, stop fasting so long. So I think those are the things that I typically recommend that people are thoughtful about. Set yourself up for success. Get the junk out of your pantry. I have teenagers, so there's always some, I always say, thankfully, the stuff they want that's junk, we always get a healthier version, but it's never stuff I want to eat, so it's not tempting. But if you have kryptonite in your house, get rid of it. And then slowly start opening up that feeding and fasting windows to kind of experiment, to find out. And leaning into your menstrual cycle is really important.
So I love this so much, and I get very technical, and I like tactics. And so when you were even saying, where are you in a cycle, would you recommend a woman to maybe get a calendar and put in their menstrual cycle when they start, and then kind of preempt to let you know? Because going back to judgment, I was like, that woman probably is like, what the hell, I can't even fast for 14 hours, right? And now she's beating herself up. Yep. Whereas if you set yourself up for success, which is what I'm always trying to do, if you put that on a calendar and you put okay, now you can go and do that, the sprint or that marathon, and then this is the time to do yoga, to kind of plan all of that out.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of us that are visually oriented, like I am, I like knowing, okay, this is a green light day, and this is a yellow, getting around after ovulation might be yellow, red, that 5 to 7 days preceding your menstrual cycle. And the question I usually get is, what do I do if I'm on the pill? Well, if you're on the pill, you have an IUD, it's very different, because if you look at the patterns of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, it looks like a menopausal woman because everything's blunted. The communication between the brain and the ovaries are disconnected to prevent pregnancy. But I would say, lean into like the lunar calendar. So, full moon is when menstruation starts. Just be cycling on and off. Now, sometimes I get angry messages from women that are like, I feel good if I fast, 30 days out of my month. And I'm like, okay, well, do what you need to do.
Right.
I'm like, I'm not there to force you, beguile you, push you, force you. I mean, that's just not part of my mentality. So I think for people understanding, like there's a time to put the gas on, take the gas off. Having that visual representation, I think, is a great idea because for a lot of people, they need that to remind themselves.
So tell me what it's doing to our sex hormones.
Well, it depends on the individual. It depends on where you are life stage. So obviously, if you're on oral contraceptives, the sad thing is it blunts your sex hormone binding globulin goes up, and that kind of scavenges up extra hormones. So the sad thing is you prevent pregnancy, but you have no libido. So that can happen, not vis-a-vis fasting, but just related to oral contraceptives. I think about, where women's testosterone levels are. We know that around ovulation, that's when we get these peaks in testosterone, which is what increases women's libido, so that they're going to look for a mate to potentially fertilize an egg, et cetera, lead to a pregnancy. I think on a lot of different levels, I think that when we're looking at that axis of like stress and sleep and all of those things, we have a hormone hierarchy in our body. So obviously oxytocin, cortisol, insulin are like the hormone hierarchy. Those have to be balanced first. And then secondary to that, we have our sex hormones. And so it's important to understand that if you're totally stressed out, if you're not sleeping, if you're over-exercising, over-restricting, guess what you're doing? Your body preferentially is going to fuel addressing this, chronic cortisol stimulation, insulin stimulation at the expense of your sex hormones. So making sure that you are not overstressing your body so that you have this downward effect of suppressing some of your sex hormones, I think is an important distinction. So when a woman who's in her peak fertile years tells me she has no libido and she's not on the pill, I'm like, that's a concern, right? But if you're perimenopausal, menopausal, you get fluctuations in hormones. I mean, they're all over the place. More often than not, it's from low testosterone levels that can drive that. But more often than not, it's secondary to chronic stress and chronic inflammation and chronic sleep deprivation. And so really getting in check with that. I think that's probably more the issues that I see, more so than fasting, but understanding that fasting is a type of stress. So if your body's overly stressed and you throw fasting in, it's like adding gasoline to a fire.
But what if it was the opposite though, and then fasting? Because for me, like I said, fasting actually helps with my inflammation. So now my inflammation goes down. Wouldn't that then help my sex hormone?
Potentially. I mean, potentially. I think there's so many things that mitigate. If your body feels, we have this autonomic nervous system. And so we have the sympathetic, which is the, fight or flight. You're being chased by a rabid animal. Parasympathetic is rest and repose, like when you digest your food, when you have an orgasm, when you're relaxed. And so understanding that if things are balanced properly, you can relax and have all those things going. So I think it's more about that stress response. If the stress response is balanced, and I'm oversimplifying things, I think that can contribute to having a healthy libido. Because if your mind is running about this massive to-do list and the work you've got to do and the 5 loads of laundry and you got to pick a kid up, I mean, no one's thinking about having sex with their husband or their partner. They're like, I got a lot of stuff on my mind. And women's minds are multitasking. Men's are solitary. I'm sure most men, it's like anytime, anywhere with their partner, they're happy. Women are like, nope, it's got to be this and this and this. Like all these things have to be in the right place in order for me to feel ready to have sex. And so I think it's the way our brains are kind of designed. We take in a lot of information all at once. We don't have tunnel vision like men. Men can focus on one thing at a time. I think that definitely contributes.
So I know you get asked this a lot, but because we brought up men, what is the difference between the benefits for men for fasting and then the women?
Well, I think men have an easier time with fasting. They generally have more lean muscle mass, generally speaking, than women do. Obviously, they don't have all these cycling hormones. I feel like men generally will see results faster and changes in body composition. I jokingly always say, like, my husband's, very healthy and very fit, but like when he started fasting, he was like a duck to water. It was like he just went off and did it and like lost weight and felt great and did all these things. And whereas if you look at studies of men and women at the same time initiate fasting, it takes women longer, and it's because of our hormones. We have higher body fat in most instances. And so when I look at men and women, I think men, it's less complicated, just like the menopausal women. But men, it's so much less complicated.
But we are, as women, supposed to have more fat than men, right?
Correct. And that's tied into fertility. And then, you go through perimenopause, menopause, and we have all these body composition changes that are relative to this continued muscle loss. So you're right. And that's why I always emphasize women need to maintain their muscle mass in order to maintain body composition and just be metabolically flexible.
How do you, I want to say persuade women to lift, but I know that you can't necessarily persuade someone, but it's like, it changed my freaking life, girl. I was that girl on the freaking treadmill that was counting the calories, that was like, oh my God, I've only run for 35 minutes, that, come on, you lazy person. Like, I was beating myself up so much, and I was like, I'm not going to lift muscle because that's just more weight. Like, I don't want to step on the scale and be heavier. The whole point is to be the opposite. And because of my gut issues, I couldn't run on the treadmill, which then allowed me to have moments where I'm like, well, I can either lift the weight or not work out at all. And then in lifting the weight was the thing that allowed me to go, oh my God, it's so powerful. But right now, I don't want people to dismiss you saying, put on muscle.
Yeah, it's important. I always say your metabolic health is important. When we know that only 88.2% of Americans are metabolically healthy, it is critically important. I don't care if you start with body weight exercise and bands and you progress to working with a trainer. Maybe you just work with a trainer until you get comfortable in the gym. It is so important. It is not just about aesthetics. It is about your metabolic health, being insulin sensitive. How many women north of 40 come to me and they are devastated because they're like, this is not, I'm not even changed anything. And all of a sudden, I have fluff in places I don't want it. My pants don't fit. I don't feel like, I just don't feel like my normal self. And having to understand like those 4 things I talked about, sleep, stress, anti-inflammatory nutrition, strength training are so important for maintaining metabolic health. But starting from a place anywhere is better than nothing. Like anything is better than nothing. But stop the chronic cardio and start lifting some weights. And like I said, if it's just body weight to start, that's great. That's a great starting point. And if you don't feel comfortable in the gym, get a trainer. Or, I always say, like, I think having a personal trainer, at least for a period of time, is very helpful for people who have no reference point or don't understand how to lift and be safe. And so that's why I think it's so, so important. It's like, hire someone that can help you be safe and help you navigate, like women that have knee problems or hip problems or shoulder problems, like how to do these things safely. I have an online trainer and I just kind of check in with her periodically. It's like, give me the program. I go to the gym and I do it. But I acknowledge I've been lifting for a long time. There are people who are new to it. Don't be fearful of it. Muscle is not just about aesthetics. It is about metabolic health. And if you want to avoid Alzheimer's, if you want to avoid these neurocognitive disorders, how many women come to me and they're like, my parents are both diabetic, my brother's diabetic, all my family members are diabetic. What do I do? And I'm like, well, I can tell you like 5 or 6 things to do automatically, but one of them is lift weights. Think about your muscles as a metabolic sink. Think about the fact that just walking, as your muscles contract, it's using glucose, it's using blood sugar. One of the easiest ways to lower your blood sugar after eating meals, go for a walk. Like super easy, 10 or 15 minute talk is super helpful.
How much of the genetic part does play into all of this?
In terms of like obesity and being overweight? It definitely changes things epigenetically. When I was in school, we talked about Pottinger's cats. And so it was this thought process, like diseased cats, like cats that had unhealthy genetics that were bred into other cats. So it just kind of propagates things. Do I think that people who are gestationally diabetic, it can lead to their offspring having more likelihood of being obese and overweight? I think that is definitely there. People have a history of PCOS. There is a thin type PCOS, so meaning people that have polycystic ovarian syndrome, they don't necessarily have to be obese to have polycystic ovarian syndrome, but at the root is insulin resistance. And you see that genetically mediated, like my mom had PCOS, several of my aunts had PCOS, I had PCOS, I was thin type PCOS. Not everyone with PCOS is obese. But just understanding that, yes, those things can make epigenetic changes that can make you more likely. That's why sometimes you'll see families where the parents are obese, the kids are obese. And a lot of it's food choices, but a lot of it's also like chronic inflammation, insulin resistance that plays a role.
And so do they need to approach things in a different way?
Well, I think that they have to be more proactive. If you're more prone to being obese and overweight, the genetic chips are there. And when it's epigenetics, it's like, does it turn on the gene? Does it not turn on the gene? So understanding that, lifestyle is still very important. I always say, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I have many family members, many generations back, that are alcoholics. I don't think I could have ever been an alcoholic, even if I had a propensity for it, because it just doesn't make me feel good. But I do think it's that epigenetic piece. Like, is the susceptibility there? Yes, but the behavior isn't. So I think in a lot of different ways, and obviously this isn't my area of expertise, but when we're looking at generational changes, like mom had diabetes, grandmother had diabetes, most people that have type 2 diabetes, it's a lifestyle issue. It's not that it just happened. Like, it's not an autoimmune issue like type 1. But when we're seeing children being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, and you're seeing more and more kids that have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You've got kids that have displaying, metabolic syndrome. I mean, it's incredibly sad. And so you just start to think nature nurture plays a role, obviously. But I think it's definitely something to be, proactive about. If you yourself know that you are insulin resistant or diabetic, do everything you can to try to reverse that. It is something that is reversible. And, a lot of my colleagues are now de-prescribing, meaning that they are proud of the fact that they're getting their patients off diabetes medications, cholesterol medications, high blood pressure medications, because of changes in lifestyle. And that to me is really encouraging, like understanding it doesn't have to be a life sentence. It is not normal to need to be on blood pressure medication. It is not normal. At the base of that is insulin resistance. Same thing with a lot of these other lifestyle disorders. So that can be changed. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease can be changed. PCOS can be reversed. I mean, all these things that we have thought of as being like, once you have them, you've got them. I don't think that's the case.
I love the idea of being able to reverse all this because as you were talking, I was thinking, right? Like, if you're young and you've got the genetic, predisposition, thank you. If you've already got that, and then now it's also epigenetics, and you put those two together, by the time you're like 18, you've got a whole load of stuff that you have to unpack in order for you to get back to that, to where you, let's say, want to be.
Yeah, and I think to me, it's troubling because, I'm on Facebook, I'm on social media, so I see friends I've had throughout my lifetime, and sometimes it's so sad. It's like I'm looking at people. I went to my high school reunion a few years ago. Most of the guys look pretty good. 30-year high school reunion. Most of the guys look pretty good. And a lot of the women either looked great or they just looked inflamed and they looked insulin resistant. And I was just like, dang, you cannot eat at 47 like you did at 18 or 17. Like, you can't. And if you're still living that lifestyle, you're going to end up being a statistic. And it's like, I don't want that for people. It's like, you don't have to live that way. It doesn't have to be your destiny.
But guys can eat pretty much loosely? Like,
no,
why do you think that the guys look decent and then the women, it was like a separate buckets?
Well, I mean, most of my guy friends were still very active. They were still surfing. They were still exercising. That was a priority to them. Got it. A lot of the women that I saw I think they were drinking a lot of alcohol. They were probably not eating a particularly healthy diet. They weren't active. I mean, I see photos of people that were all the same age, and I'm like, I cannot believe we're all the same age. Like, some people look 15 years older than we do. And that's sad. It doesn't have to be that way. So I keep going back to lifestyle definitely plays a huge role. And I see a lot of middle-aged women where alcohol starts to become a problem on a lot of different levels.
Because that's the thing they turn to as we get more stress, and as women we try to take on more things in today's society?
Well, I think it's a and this is not pejorative, I'm just saying some people, they use it because they can't sleep well, because it helps them, it's a sedative, so it helps them fall asleep, it doesn't help them stay asleep. They do it because they're not effectively utilizing stress reduction strategies, and so they think that's an easy thing. Like, I was talking to someone recently, and they were like, oh yeah, I have 2 glasses of wine every night. I'm like, it's actually not a good thing to drink that much wine. Like, I didn't say that, but in my mind, I was like, if you really actually read the research on alcohol consumption. But I think for a lot of people, it's examining your relationship. Like, if you can't get through the day without drinking, that's a problem. If that's your go-to, resource for stress reduction, that's probably not the best thing to be doing. And certainly in middle age, things start to change and flux. And so for men and women, you can't eat like you did when you were 18. You just can't.
So to be able to identify something like that would be, is it a need or a want?
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's that uncomfortable feelings. They don't want to deal with the uncomfortable feelings. So what's easier? It's like, I numb it. Whether it's with food, whether it's with alcohol, whether it's, illicit drugs, it's, over-exercising, porn. I mean, all these things that can play a role. And we're very much dopamine kind of mediated. So it's like, oh, what lights my brain up makes me feel good. It's temporary. Okay, let's do that.
Do you think that's partly why we like fasting? Do you think that you do get that dopamine after like a 16-hour?
I mean, you get counter-regulatory hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine are up, and that helps to kind of blunt that hunger response when people are, new to fasting and they feel like, okay, I can go longer without eating. I don't so much think it's a dopaminergic kind of mechanism in the body. I do think people feel good when they are burning ketones. So when you're in a fasted state, you're burning ketones. In fact, I'm burning ketones right now, I can tell.
Well, you can tell I love that.
Yeah, because you have so much mental clarity, and it's a great way. Like your brain preferentially loves fat as a fuel source, and so when you're burning ketones, your brain's like, I am turned on, I'm on it, I can find all the words I need to say, string everything together, sound cohesive, sound confident. Yeah, I mean, that I think is what makes people feel good. Like those ketones, and there's something called beta hydroxybutyrate, and that diffuses across the blood-brain barrier, and that makes people feel good. So I think that's what I suspect it's more. That's my supposition.
So we didn't even talk about ketones, but that was the added thing for me, that when I put fasting with fat, changed my life. And the thing that I realized, I was that person, like I said, on the treadmill, that I then went to weight. I threw out my food scale and my measuring cups because I used to measure everything. And I got to the point where I'm like, I'm just going to see what a world would look like for like a month or whatever if I didn't measure anything. And I just pour a bunch of olive oil on my food and don't even think about it and eat as much avocado as I like if I'm hungry. Like, you wouldn't believe it unless you actually do it. I felt full. I felt like mental clarity. So that mixed with fasting was just like the next level. And then of course I pushed my ketogenics a little too far, and I got a little obsessed. So I was like taking my ketones every single day. I had a continuous glucose monitor. And then again, I had to, kind of ease off a little. But just in general now, the mind clarity is incredible. Girl, thank you so much. Like, there's so much more we can talk about.
If you want to know what foods to eat in order to boost your energy, lose weight, and look younger, then click here right now.
This is so important. Why is nobody talking about this?
The glucose goddess is in the house and destroys and debunks every single thing we thought was true.
That is the core belief.